Hello? So we'll continue with section 4 of Thoughts on White Frailty, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism by Robin DiAngelo. And hopefully we'll get through it this time. I think I've said the vast majority of my more intense feelings on this subject, and of course there are pieces I missed, pieces I skipped over, ideas which, after having talked about them, I've begun to reflect upon and begin to revise, I think, in some small ways. And as we continue on throughout the days after this, of course, I will think again and again, and will encounter racial stereotypes in my own head, outside my own head, race and society again and again. It will be a topic of news and conversation for years to come, I do not doubt. But for now, let us begin to end. Okay, so she talks in this chapter 7, racial triggers for white people. It says here, in a cross-racial dialogue in an organization that is trying to increase its staff's racial understanding, the participants of color are repeatedly challenged with problematic assumptions in a white woman's statements. I feel like everything I say is thrown back at me, she exclaims. White people are being attacked and blamed. We have to defend ourselves or just be used as punching bags. I give up. I'm not saying anything else. The only black woman on a workplace planning team listens attentively to her white colleagues for the first hour of a meeting and then asks a question about the proposal. After the meeting, her supervisor calls her into her office and informs her that the other woman felt attacked by her. So this is stuff that happens. This is stuff I have experienced happening, been in the room and felt happening. Right? Where in the one place, you can be in a situation where racial ideas are being talked back and forth, and sometimes you feel attacked, or you feel as if there is no response. And the problem here, I think, comes from the radicalism that can happen when you have an anti-establishment, anti-racist stance. And when that stance is, or the message there is part of the dialogue we hear in the public sphere of the topic, right? Like, I think what happens quite often is people do not mean to be offensive. People do not mean to attack the white person in their group, again and again. People do not mean to create no way out. People do not mean to be entirely negative. But what happens is, if you're white, that's what you hear sometimes, because you are assuming things about the conversation. You're assuming instances of dislike or stress, and you don't know how to get out of it, right? You've bought into the entire idea that whiteness is bad. And you've bought into the entire idea that, therefore, if whiteness is bad and I'm white, then I must be bad. So if they're talking about whiteness being bad, they're talking about me being bad. And, of course, the way out of this is to realize that whiteness is not ingrained in you as a person, that even if you have benefited from or been part of a system of racism in a positive or negative sense, that you do not have to be identified with that system, that a realization or a claim that you have done something wrong, you have made some small faults, right? That there are things you could improve. That's life, that's existence, and that is dealing with troubles and problems. There are folk out there who feel that any criticism of them whatsoever is an attack, is horrible, is an existential crisis if they are not right in every particular. And those people, I think, often are the loudest because they are the most offended, because they are the most frail, because they strike back. But there is a minority of folk that are like that. I think the vast majority of folk, I hope the vast majority of folk, when shown that they are doing something wrong, are able to review and reflect upon this. Sometimes, and I think this happens with me too, right? It can take hours. It can take days. It can take, you're angry, you're frustrated, I'm cussing out a problem or a computer, and give me 10 minutes, give me an hour, let me go to sleep, let me wake up, let me reflect and review upon this, and then tomorrow I will have overcome much of the emotional trouble. Give me a few hours to ruminance on an idea. Give me a stress and then a relaxation, and then a stress and then a relaxation. Forge me like a blade in fire and water and oil, and in heat and hitting with a hammer, and then cooling down and heating up, alternating. And as we go through life, we change. This is easier, of course, when you're young, and harder when you're old, but not impossible. And so, as we get into racial triggers for white people, the feeling that you can take offense when someone's talking about something, partially, again, as I've reiterated several times, this comes from mistakes in language. This comes from definitions of racism, which are different between different ideas, between different worldviews, between different thought processes. You get the anti-racism, discrimination, and unracism triangle here. And depending on your ideal, you're going to hear racism and think of it as meaning different things, as referring to different activities, and so on. So in order to draw that out, my advice, for myself at least, is to be more careful in my speech. And I fail at this several times. I have failed at this, I've noticed, in how I've been talking, right? But, I want to distinguish individual racism and structural racism. I want to distinguish racism from racial discrimination. I want to distinguish anti-racism from unracism, and so on. And using these not just different ideas, not just different paradigms of speech, but literally different words, right? There's advice for writing I've heard, which goes, imagine that the character you are writing has something she desperately wants to say. I love you, I hate you, I need something in my life, I am in pain because you've done this thing, I am insecure, I am overconfident, I am suffering, or I think that I could find joy, but I don't want to tell you, or I want you to love me, but I can't say that, sort of thing, right? And what you do is you make the character so that they cannot say what they most dearly wish to say. They cannot speak directly the words in their heart, so they must show it. They must try to get at it in an obtuse fashion. They cannot bear to say I love you. They must say something else. Right? They must be the playground kid pulling a little girl's hair. They must be the person who shows up to your house every other day to hang out with your brother, but invites you to join them in all the time on an adventure or in getting ice cream or something, right? And those are probably not the best ideas or examples, but I hope that the force of the statement is there, right? If you want to talk about racism, I think it may be maybe instructive to attempt to talk about racism without at any point mentioning the word racism, right? Because if as she alludes to in the very beginning of this book, when she says, I'm talking about structural racism, but white people often interpret racism to mean individual racism. Well, then don't use the word racism if people are misinterpreting what you say. Use something else. Use structural racism or the historical effects of race. or racial disparities, right? Don't be blunt. Try to expand your speech. Try to come at people from different ways. And if they don't understand what you're saying, then use a different word and a different word and a different word, right? The way we communicate is not set in stone. Be inventive. And I notice this happens quite often. When I'm trying to explain something to a person, or if I'm trying to indicate to them that I understand what they mean, then I'll say it in one way and say it another way and say it another way. And one of those 5 or 6 or 7 ways will click, will be okay, I get what you mean now, and you get what I mean, because we're using a language. The worlds of our language overlap in some way. And sometimes that requires work in order to figure out whether our meanings are compatible. And so then, okay, so the second bit, she speaks up here. The only black woman on a workplace planning team listens attentively to her white colleagues the first hour of meeting and then asks a question about their proposal. After the meeting, her supervisor calls her into her office and informs her that the other woman felt attacked by her. So there's, I would say, 2 things going on here. One, you have a frailty in the people who've been talking for an hour. And look, I'm well aware of the significance of what I'm saying right here, but someone who can stand in front of a group and talk about themselves or talk about their idea for an hour is usually very invested in that idea, and upon being challenged may feel incredibly frail, right? Incredibly threatened by this. If I've spent 2 hours harping on about how the anti-racist movement is well-meaning but often fails to get its results achieved in a manner which avoids running into white frailty as a problem, or as an extreme defensive measure where the best defense is an offense sort of thing, right? And then somebody challenges that, then yeah, I'm going to be a little sensitive for a bit. I'm gonna be like, okay, look, I just like the manner of speaking comes here, and when you critique somebody and whatnot, if I'm giving a presentation, someone asks a question, and I'm like, okay, I went over that in the first hour. Or I went over that in the first 5 minutes, why that doesn't matter. Or someone asks a question and I go, okay, let me take another 10 minutes explaining why you're wrong. Okay, let me take another 10 minutes explaining why that question doesn't make sense, because you obviously didn't understand what I just talked about. But this is me saying what I've experienced in it. The other thing that happened, I think definitively, right, is, hey, you're a black woman or you're just a woman in a organization, in a meeting, and you speak up and you say something, and everyone else, or it doesn't even have to be everyone else, it can just be a few people, think that the way you said that indicates anger or frustration. The way you said that indicates an instability. The way you said that came across as snide or an insult. And this is definitely something which happens, right? This is a viewpoint I think people most certainly have that is both racist and sexist, where, I've heard the complaint 1,000 times, right? As a woman, you have to be nice and polite, and you can't be mean and brash, you can't be direct, because if you're direct, then you're perceived as terrible or awful or, mean, and so you have to be gentle with the men. Their feelings are easily bruised. And, soft like a flower, float like a bee, sort of bit. And that happens because of exactly what she's talking about here. The assumptions people have, the views of proper station they have. I was reading a book. Well, I'm still in the middle of reading a book, but it's about some archaeologists in the 50s, and she's growing up, and she's describing how it wasn't proper for women to do this, or wasn't proper for women to do that, or her father wouldn't take a day off work to drive a daughter to his museum. And I mean, these are ideas which exist. These are ideas which people have. This is an example of individual racism, or individual sexism is the example I've given because it's where I myself have encountered and seen it more often. Whereas in racism, it can be a little more rare, I think, because even if, the black person stands up and says something that you find offensive or said in a mean way or said too directly, I mean, you're also kind of thinking, okay, am I mad at them because they're black? Like, am I reading into the racial issues here too much? I'm reading into cultural differences. I've certainly been in situations where it's not, I don't know about black, but black ghetto, I guess, white ghetto. The sort of ghetto, like where someone can be, the point of communication is to be brash, is to be loud, is to be seen as being powerful or sure of yourself. So it can be very difficult to speak out in a way which is polite, right? Or speak out in a way which indicates a vulnerability, because you can't ever be vulnerable because the world is dangerous and out to get you, right? And so I've talked with people where I go, okay, if I didn't know the culture I'm getting into here, I would think they're being an ass. Or, it can just be something like in Asia, I've had experiences where, hanging out with a friend. I've had plans to hang out with a friend, and then they give me a phone call like an hour and a half before we're supposed to meet up and say, oh, my grandma has a thing today. I didn't know about it. It got pulled on me and I got to go. And, I'm sitting there going, what the hell? I'm like, it's not like your grandma's in the hospital or anything. It's like it's a church function your grandma decided you have to go to today, and didn't even bother to tell you about. And I'm like, what? Like this, how rude to me. And yet, you experience enough times and you talk with people and you're like, oh, it's because grandma's the matriarch and grandma says goes, and you're expected to do it because you live in their house, and your entire duties of your existence in your life are about family, and in a way where grandma calls or your mom calls or dad calls you to do something, you better bloody well go do it. Doesn't matter what you have planned with your friends. And that's a cultural thing. So I would be like, oh, I felt the first 2 or 3 times it happened to me, I felt very insulted. And then I realized, oh, okay, like this is just something in the culture you got to deal with as a statement. When a friend says, oh, I'll hang out with you, they really mean, I'll hang out with you unless my family says I have to do something. That's a cultural bit. And, I've been in talks with people who are very ghetto, who tend to challenge in their speech. So that happens as well. But specifically what she's talking about here, right? The black woman in a workplace says something, and then 3 or 4 people around the table say that they felt insulted by that. Yeah, that is probably the event happening of a racial stereotype being used incorrectly. That is the event happening of the white women around the table, or some of them are feeling threatened because someone of a lower class dared to speak up, of a different race, but, a lower class sort of bit. And I don't think, I think I agree with her here in how power structures work, in that I don't think I've seen the same thing in a gathering of like black people and one white person speaking out. Although I've seen similar things in the gathering of like girls and then one guy speaking out. But oftentimes in that situation, like the sexist situation where it's a bunch of girls and then one guy speaking out, it doesn't come across as insulting. It comes across as like the guy is ignorant. Like the feeling you get as the male in that situation is like, I said something. All these girls look at me like I'm an idiot, and I don't know why I feel like an idiot. It's not like they don't feel insulted. It's like you get a feeling of pity. You're like, okay, I guess I'm blind to whatever the topic is I asked about. Sort of bit. But yeah. Okay. So this does happen. There are people who are individually racist in a way which is racist in a way which is racist by the old way of racism, right? By the non-structural way of racism, where they do get offended because someone else dared say something and dared question them. And that is a personal problem. That is something that when you see, you should talk about. Right? That is something that if you become offended because someone spoke at you, ask yourself, why is that? And sometimes it is probably because of racial issues. Although sometimes it may also be simple, I don't know. It gets complicated, right? Like I don't think I would experience that issue, but I could definitely see like that happening. Like it's one of those bits where I can't precisely name any time I've seen that happen, but I understand the event clearly. And why is that? I must have seen it in a movie. I must have heard about it. I must have been there when it happened at some point and realized something was wrong. Or like, why do I have this feeling that, oh yeah, that definitely happens most certainly? Like I have this belief in it. It's being buttressed by some feeling that this is a history. Okay, so when ideologies such as colorblindness, meritocracy, and individualism are challenged, intense emotional reactions are common. Yeah. I have discussed several reasons why whites are so defensive about the suggestion that we benefit from and are complicit in a racial system. Social taboos against talking openly about race, the racist equal bad / not racist equal good binary, fear and resentment towards people of color, our delusion that we are objective individuals, our guilty knowledge that there is more going on than we can or will admit to, deep investment in a system that benefits us and that we have been conditioned to see as fair, internalized superiority and sense of right to rule, a deep cultural legacy of anti-black sentiment. So I'm not going to go on too much about this. I think I spoke up pretty clearly in my intense emotional reaction about this at the end of part 3 of this talk. But, to reiterate in a very short manner, yeah, colorblindness, meritocracy, and individualism are challenged. There can be intense emotional reactions. That does not mean those emotional reactions are wrong. I think that a balance needs to be found between all these benefits, seeing color blindness, meritocracy, and what's the opposite of meritocracy? Structuralism, where you are born in the structure is all that matters. Individualism versus community. Right? We are people who see color sometimes, but in other times do not see color. We are people who believe in and live in a meritocracy, but a meritocracy which is weighed towards certain people. Okay? And yet that weight is not a rule. I think we have overcome in many cases, in many senses, the worst effects of slavery and repression through the civil rights era and through today, that we have gotten better. We have reduced the gap. And part of that is saying that, yeah, we live in a meritocracy where we believe and feel that where you are is where you deserve to be. But it is a meritocracy where you can move. It is a meritocracy where whites can be worse and blacks can be better than the system, quote unquote, would have them be. And, we are individuals who have our own ideas and events and ways of interacting. And yet we are also part of a community where we work within a structure. We have a language where we have a common idea and understanding of how people exist and how people should act and what good and bad is. But just because we are part of a system does not mean we cannot overcome the system, does not mean we cannot change the system. So yeah, intense and emotional reactions can happen because our points of view are challenged. That does not mean that just because there is an intense emotional reaction, the point of view being challenged is wrong. It means that there is something greater going on here. There are strong points of view, strong gems in the world, shining with an intense light, where we struggle to find the true revelations of actual events, as opposed to just our own painted on colors. Okay, so she says, white frailty is a state in which even a minimum amount of racial stress in the habitus becomes intolerable, triggering a range of defensive moves. So we have to ask here, right? Okay, so a reaction to stress is a defensive move, right? Is let me protect myself, let me guard myself, let me put my high walls up, let me step away for a second and reevaluate, let me yell at the wild beast or the other person or the threatening idea to back away and give me space to breathe, because I feel threatened because I'm under stress. And so there are two ways to look at this. There are many ways to look at it, but two major ways in the racial, in the way of talking about racial ideas here. One is, if you're dealing with a white frailty, someone with a high level of emotional frailty or white frailty here, I think it may be more honest to say racial frailty, because I most definitely have experienced like the same thing along the black lines, right? Black frailty. We're challenging some aspect of black culture is seen as really bad, or saying that, yeah, black people can be racist too is seen as really stressful and wonderful, or people who are honestly just too sensitive, right? And that's the other way. It can be seen that a white frailty can be an extreme sensitivity and an extreme reaction. People who cannot handle stress. Like I think that I can handle stress. I think I may become emotional and active, and have to deal with that stress. But that is stress. Just because I react to stress in a way that works for me, in a way where I try not to shut down my own emotions, because that is something I personally do, right? When I have stress around me, I tend to shut down my own emotions and try to think very logically and not feel at all. Okay, so I get emotional when I become really invested in an issue, and what can happen is people are under a racial stress, or under the stress of a conversation, and either you can handle that or you cannot. Either you can handle the conversation, or either you can still engage in dialogue, either you can go back and forth, either you can put forth an idea and you can have a question, or you cannot, or you become so defensive that things shut down and you don't want to talk about it, and you won't even allow the idea to percolate into your head. But it is also important to understand this can happen on both sides, right? That this is what she's calling white frailty. She's focusing on white frailty as white people's reluctance to talk about racism. And that is a thing that definitely happens, that exists. But it is important to understand that a reaction to stress is also a matter of how that person as an individual exists. It's not just the system. It's not just the taboo about talking about race. It's not just how uncomfortable you feel. It's about you and whether you are able to continue engaging. So in order to continue to engage with someone who is not frail, you just ask questions and you just take them for what they're saying face value. If you want to, reply to something I'm saying, then try not to read too much into it. Or if you are reading into it, say that you are reading into it. Say that I am reading this from what you say, or I understand this from what you say. I've been trying to do that here in some of my critiques, where I'm like, I understand what the author is trying to do, but I disagree still. Okay? Or from what the author is saying, I understand her to mean this, or I understand her to be talking about this issue, and so I'm going to reply to what I hear. I think she's trying to say this one idea, but what she's actually communicating to me is this totally different idea. So let me say that and then explain why I'm responding in a certain way. Okay? And that's what you do with someone who is emotionally unfrail. Someone who is white but not frail, as it is, or black and not frail, or Asian and not frail. You have an honest discussion, and sometimes these get a little heated. That doesn't mean they're bad, okay? It means they're working, it would be my feeling there. If people are emotionally engaged, and I am obviously sparking a reaction of some sort, and that means that they're having to confront me instead of just defensively shutting it down through an entirely intellectual fashion. Well, we don't talk about that, or well, you misunderstand the whole structure of racism and how it works, and I'm sorry, poor ignorant you. I'm like, no. Engage with me as an individual. Okay? But if you can't do that, if you cannot engage with someone as an individual, if they are so emotionally frail about a topic, then you have to come at it through obtuse means. You have to find out what their triggers are and not pull those triggers and then not step in those traps. And that is something that to get to is somewhat difficult because it will tend to be individuals who do this. One of the critiques I do have about this book is it's talking about white frailty. Why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism, but it doesn't really give any advice for how to get past that frailty. It's talking about how you understand frailty. It's talking about what's going on here. It's talking about how that's bad, how white frailty is bad. But there's not a whole lot of advice about if you're talking with someone who is in the throes of white frailty, how do you get through to them? How do you bring them out? And that I think was what tends to be missing here. Okay. Oh, and then she gives some stories about when people were in a situation, where they had a racial experience, right? During one of our sessions, Mr. Roberts told me about his colleague, a white female teacher who recently had 2 black students at her desk. She prefaced something she said to one of them with "girl." The student was clearly taken aback and asked, "Did you just call me girl?" The other student said it was okay. The teacher called all her students girl. In relaying this story to me, Mr. Roberts expressed his and his colleagues' anger about having to be so careful and not being able to say anything anymore. Right. So this goes back to something I talked about, right? You have to be careful when calling a black boy because it has racial overtones, because it refers in some way to slavery or servitude, or they would or whites would call blacks grown men boy as a way of demonetizing them. I think I'm not really up in the history of why it's bad. I'm just, you experience that as an osmosis, right? As part of the color view that you intake. Or the understand. Yes, I would say not necessarily the color view you intake, right? But the understanding that a colored view exists. The understanding that if I call a black boy boy, or if I call a black girl girl, then they may see intentional insults, intentional racism in the use of those words. Right? So even if I personally do not intend to insult a black boy by calling him boy, because that's the definition of the word. I have to, you have to say kid or you or whatnot, or dude. And yet I also know that even if I don't entirely understand the emotional reaction that's going on here, I understand that there are people who do have an emotional reaction towards this word, and it's a negative emotional reaction. So I don't have to understand why they do it, why they have a negative emotional reaction to know I shouldn't use the word in this situation. And yet it's not precisely my colored view, I think. It's like my awareness of the colored view existing in society. And that's, I think, a more complicated issue. But maybe that's partially what I get at by saying that we don't have to be racist in every interaction. We can be aware of racism exists, and that race is a factor that takes part in our discussions. But that does not mean that we must engage with it in every speech. This means that I may know that the world sees race, but that doesn't mean that I need to myself see race at this moment. You have to understand when the quality is relevant and when it is not. Okay, but back to the story. For these teachers, the students' reaction to being called girl was an example of this oversensitivity, and this is an issue, I think, in discussing racism. It tends to be a very sensitive topic for people. That is, because of breaking this taboo, it tends to be a topic which people react to and know that it's, as she says, right, as she points out, it's not a common manner of speaking, right? Or if it is, it comes with certain histories to it, or it comes with certain understandings that, when so-and-so comes up and she talks about how whiteness is doing bad, then what she's really doing is showing her own white guilt, or if she's black, she's really blaming white people for what their ancestors did, and it's like, okay, that may not be what she means, but it may be what you think she means based on your interpretation of the general speech which is going around the society here regarding this topic, and how certain words mean in certain ways, and so on and so on. And you overcome that by dealing with people as individuals and by being very clear in your language. Don't use racism, use structural or individual racism sort of statement. But what can also happen is people can be oversensitive. Okay, it is not always a mistake to feel that they are reacting defensively, and this is something that you have to deal with in daily life with everybody over almost every topic. There have been days when I've been talking to my brother and I tell the exact same stupid joke I've done my entire life, and then he reacts, extra mad, and I'm like, well, what's going on? Right? And so because there's something wrong at home, right? Or he just lost his job. He's feeling sensitive right now, and all of a sudden the words I use and the way I speak are something that, instead of him being like sticking his tongue out and engaging in the game of annoyances that brothers play, he gets super mad about it. And I'm like, I don't understand. I'm doing the exact same thing I did last week, and now all of a sudden it's forbidden. Right, now all of a sudden it's a topic I can't enter into. So that's just, individuals differ in their sensitivity. Individuals differ in how they react to something based on their recent experiences. And there's no, I don't know if there's any real answer here to dealing with oversensitivity or recognizing. I don't think there's one simple answer to recognizing when an oversensitivity is an oversensitivity and when an oversensitivity is just flavor of the month issue. Right? In order to overcome this, you need to, of course, you have to be emotionally tough. You have to be willing to be open in your speech. You have to say, look, I'm feeling sensitive about that right now, or I don't want to, we're all familiar with this, right? I don't want to talk about that right now. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about the divorce. Let's just play some card games. Let's just play some video games. Let's just go watch a football game. You go, I don't want to talk about the divorce. And having the ability to say, or having the openness in our relationships to say, I'm feeling emotionally stressed about that topic, or emotionally sensitive about this topic, and let's not talk about it right now. Or being able to go up to a teacher and say, hey, I understand you probably didn't mean this, but it's not a word or a usage that I feel comfortable with you using for these reasons or another. But, I think particularly what they're talking about here, right? In relaying this story to me, Mr. Roberts expressed his and his colleagues' anger about having to be so careful and not being able to say anything anymore. As an example of white privilege. That is, that in my parents and my siblings' daily lives, we can pretty much say whatever we want. There are going to be reactions, there are going to be feelings, right? There are going to be results, good or bad, which come from that. But the general feeling is I can say anything to anybody. I can go up to the President of the United States and insult him to his face. That means that because I am an American, I can tell my boss no and I can quit on the spot because I am an American. I can scream profanities at the person who threw an orange at me last week because I am an American, sort of bit. And this is a privilege in your life. So what happens is anytime you are unable to speak about a topic, it becomes like a manacle of thorns, right? It hurts, it's sharp. And this happens to children most particularly, right? Hey, like my parents are going through a divorce right now, or I'm being bullied right now, or my dog died and I'm feeling very sad, but I can't say that. I can't explain to people, that I'm having troubles. I can't say that I'm angry, or I can't say, I'm sensitive or need to walk out. So there is, I think, an entire paradigm, which is to become less emotionally sensitive, right? To become emotionally tougher. And how do you do that exactly? Because one of the issues I think that can happen, especially with anti-racism and discrimination, right? And unracism, and that is on these points of the triangle, right? Is when you are in the point of the triangle, when you are in an extreme, either emotional state or extreme belief state, which does not allow for much stretching of interpretation, then the more set in stone your beliefs are, the more frail they become. Okay, so it happens with religion as well. There is an entire difference, a huge, gigantic difference in the way you talk about religion with someone who has had a crisis of faith versus someone who has never had a crisis of faith, right? The person who has had a crisis of faith is less sensitive because they understand that not all people believe as they do, because they have gone through that. The person who is very religious but has never had a crisis of faith does not comprehend why others cannot believe in his God, right? Does not comprehend why others question the rules or the laws, because he has never had to question those. He has never been in that position. He hasn't stretched his mind out. So this is where, old Greek philosophy comes into vogue. This is where that individuality becomes important, because instead of the rules of the community that we must follow, instead of the rules of the movement that we must follow, we are individuals, and we can question this. We can say there are complexities, there are shades of gray, there are guidelines, but not rules. And what happens here, I think, is interesting. She says, these white teachers' responses illustrate several dynamics of white frailty. First, the teachers never consider that in not understanding the student's reaction, they might be lacking some knowledge or context. They demonstrated no curiosity about the student's perspective or why she might have taken offense, nor did they show concern about the student's feelings. So this is where you step over the line from words like I totally understand the words of, oh my God, I have to be so careful. I can't say anything because people take offense. And oh my gosh. But that is entirely different from standing there and going, oh my gosh, people take offense and there's no reason for them to take offense. I didn't mean anything by it. Well, that may be nice, but what I mean to say is not always what I communicate. And this is something that is in the philosophy of dialogue, right? How do we speak with each other in a way so that our meanings are clear, our intentions are clear, our dialogue is effective? You have to be opening, you have to be willing to question, you have to put yourself in the other person's shoes, right? You have to be an individual and recognize as well that the other person is an individual. And in this case of what she's talking about here in racial issues of white and black, you have to recognize that there is a white view of the world and there is also a black view of the world. There is a racial discrimination view of the world, and there is also an anti-racist view of the world and an unracist view of the world. And these views modify how we look at and understand and comprehend different people's actions or speeches. So it is curiosity about the other person. It is willingness to question that is at the heart of the philosophical enterprise. It is at the heart of a balanced, wise individual. And so that's the way to get through here. Like that's my advice. It's, you need to have philosophical force. You need to utilize the benefits of the philosophical activity in order to bring this impassive speech into the fore. Right? Bring this impassive emotions where so-and-so is insulted, and then so-and-so is insulted that so-and-so is insulted, and they just end up being mad at each other and never talking about the real issue. Right, so like if I say something and a person reacts in a way where they are obviously extremely emotionally invested in my speech, then what I need to do is stop, or try to do at least, is stop for a second and go, what the hell is going on, and why are they freaking out? Okay, let me focus. Okay, let me not freak out. But obviously there's something going on here I do not understand. So let me try to, either I back away and I say, okay, I'm not engaging with this. Or you say, okay, let me try to bring out their emotions and bring out their reasoning and get them to explain what's going on. Because obviously what has happened here is that there is an emotional pressure going on, and something just squeaked through a crack. And when you have a bunch of pressure and then you have a small hole opening up, and that pressure comes through the small hole, then it's going to come out really fast. You're going to have a steam whistle rise, and that steam whistle is a person freaking out emotionally because of something you did. Right? And I'm like, okay, let me think, what the hell is happening here? Because I do not understand. You have to go into that and go, I need to understand what's happening here, because they're freaking out, and that is dangerous, and that is problematic. That could be an issue, and because they may be freaking out, but I don't know how much they're freaking out, right? I don't know if they're freaking out a little bit, or if they're gonna full on, call the principal, call the news, come up with me with a knife, sort of issue, right? Like, I don't get this, and that's to become involved with that is to practice your social speech, is to understand what's going on. She's talking here about racial issues where it's, so-and-so is like, hey, I'm black and I was offended by this, or I'm white and I was offended by this, and we stop. We say, okay, you were offended by that, and it doesn't matter. And why do we stop? One is we don't care about the individual, but the other reason, I think, is what we see them not as an individual, we see them as a structure. We say, oh, you're black and you're upset about this. You're upset about this because you're black. You're upset about this because black folk, quote unquote, are supposed to be upset about this. Or you are upset about this because white folk, quote unquote, are supposed to be upset about this. Right? And so the fact of you being upset about this means nothing. Because now we are not two individuals engaging. Instead, we are two actors in a play. We are two hands doing a mummer's farce. There's Ralph Waldo Emerson talks about this at one point, but he's like, I go into a conversation sometimes and I recognize that a person I'm involved with can't say no new words. That a person I'm involved with, I'm talking with, is just parroting someone else's ideas and has no ideas of their own. And what can happen is we see that white frailty happens, and we go, well, all white people like that. I'm like, no. Get past the color. Get past the structure. See the shades of gray. Look at someone's hand. Be like, okay, you got some white, you got some tan, you got some brown, you got some mauve, you got some puce. You have a few black spots because you're a pirate. You have some pink in your nails. And there are complexities in the individual. So get past the structure. Get to the individual. And if you end up invalidating the ideas of a student of color, understand that there is a difference between invalidating the ideas of color versus invalidating the ideas of the student. And so invalidating that, when she says invalidating the ideas of the student of color, which force is operative here? Right? Are they invalidating student, or are they invalidating color? And of course, there's a mixture of that, but I think in general terms, you're going to be invalidating one or the other more in an issue where it's a racial issue at play, or a racial manner of speech, boy, girl, cracker, whatever. And white frailty, as she's speaking it here as structural white frailty, that a person evidences happens when they take refuge in a structure. When they say, well, I know the correct response to this because I have been taught the correct response to this through my socialization. And the same thing happens with, again, I'm going to repeat, right? The same thing happens if you're black. I have been taught the correct response to this through my socialization. And there are benefits to that. It's easier. Sometimes it is an idea which needs a huge number of folk to to speak about, right? Like the civil rights movement would not have happened if every person as an individual had a slightly different idea what was going on, right? It was because you had mass numbers of people who were able to recognize in a structural idea and something of themselves who were able to organize around this structure and this movement to say this is wrong and let us be as one and move together as the mighty mass of humanity in order to shift our society and how it operates on its deepest level. So structural ideas about race and racism are important to have, but do not become so caught up in them that you are unable to have individual conversation. Don't be so caught up in the idea that I'm white, so all black people must hate the white people, that you can't have that conversation. I recognize when structure is good, when structure is bad. When structure is useful for a topic of discussion and when structure is unuseful for a topic of discussion. Sometimes color gets in the way of communication. Sometimes who we are as individuals gets in the way of talking about color, right? I mean, you can have a conversation with someone and all you see is the color of their skin or their race, and you can't talk with them as an individual. But what can also happen is you're talking with someone who you think is an absolute asshole. You're talking with someone who is just the worst person you've ever met. Or I'm using it, but you can talk, or you're talking with someone who has a paradigm view of the world which is incompatible with yours. You're talking with someone who is an extreme visionary in a social or a religious or a technical sense, and they don't even want to have a conversation with you. And you're going, and then they might come back and say something like, well, you won't speak with me because I'm white. You won't speak with me because I'm black. And I'm like, no. I won't speak with you because you're an asshole. There are instances where we mistake individual dislike for structural dislike. I think there are very few times where we mistake structural dislike for individual dislike. And this is interesting here, I think. She says, I am coaching a small group of white employees on how racism manifests in their workplace. One member of the group, Karen, is upset about a request from Joan, her only colleague of color, to stop talking over her. Karen doesn't understand what talking over Joan has to do with race. She is an extrovert and tends to talk over everyone. I try to explain how the impact is different when we interrupt across race because we bring our histories with us. While Karen sees herself as a unique individual, Joan sees Karen as a white individual. Being interrupted and talking over by white people is not a unique experience for Joan, nor is it separate from larger cultural context. Karen exclaims, "Forget it, I can't say anything right, so I'm going to stop talking." Okay? So the preceding episode highlights Karen's white frailty. She is unable to see herself in racial terms. When she is pressed to do so, she refuses to engage further. Okay. There are some good ideas in this, some bad ideas. What she's trying to say here, what she's trying to point out here, is that the white Karen doesn't think that her whiteness should be involved in this conversation, does not think that her whiteness is a relevant piece of information for the relation and for the emotions that Joan is feeling towards her. She says, you can be upset because I talked over you. I understand that. But to be upset because I talked over you and I'm white, what does the fact that I'm white have to do with me talking over you? Right? That is that is taking my individuality, the fact that I'm an extrovert that talks over people, and saying that, no, I'm not an individual. You are a structure. You are a nothing. You are a nobody. You are a thing. You are white. Okay? So white frailty, in this sense, is the reaction to that. It'd be like, what's happening here? And the problem is twofold. One problem is, of course, Karen doesn't understand that Joan here sees herself as white. She's like, I didn't know that was something that was important here. I didn't know I didn't know I didn't know that you saw color in this situation. I didn't. And so white frailty, as she talks about, is the force that resists entering into a racial discussion. And she says that the reason this is the case is because white people are on top of the social pyramid. So that in order to talk, and white is seen as the normal. So that in order to talk about white as race, you have to step down off the top of the pyramid. You have to descend into the slums of actual people of color and become yourself a person of color. Instead of colorless, you are white. And look, that sucks. And the same thing can happen from the other direction. Instead of colorless, you are black, right? I mean, I've been in situations where I'm talking and I'm engaging with someone, and all of a sudden I realize, oh, this woman is upset at me because I'm white. And how do I know that? Because she's emotionally upset about something. You know, I've had this conversation with customers 100 times, and she's much more emotionally upset about it than most customers I have. And then my black colleague comes along and starts talking to her, and she immediately calms down. Even though my black colleague is giving her the exact same information. And I'm going, oh, she was upset because I was white and telling her no. These are our policies. I can't do this, whatever, for you. But when the black girl coworker next to me says, oh, no, these are our policies. We can't do anything for you. Then she accepts that because she's like, oh, this is someone of the same race talking to me. And that situation was like, I was just like, okay, she's, you're in one of those situations I was just talking about, where I'm like, okay, what the hell is going on? She is freaking out. And I don't know why. And then immediately within 30 seconds, I understood why. Oh, she's freaking out because she sees me as white. Because she has the exact same conversation 30 seconds later with the black coworker of mine, and she calms down. Okay, so now I understand what's going on here. And there is a result to that, because I'm standing there going, I don't see color. And there is this entire movement, like the anti-racist movement that she's talking about here, the anti-view. The reason it's called white frailty is because it is saying, it is pushing on the unracist viewpoint and saying that is bad. It is saying that you should see race at all times and in all ways, right? And I'm saying, no, you shouldn't see race at all times. In fact, yeah, seeing race is bad. I 100% agree with the idea that seeing race is bad. However, I understand that sometimes we do bad things in order to do good, right? We cannot be perfect, right? I mean good in the sense of perfect. I mean good in the sense of the ideal world is one where race is not an issue of discussion, is one where nobody's white, nobody's black, nobody's Asian, right? Is one where everyone is Hopi or Japanese or African American or from Ghana or Sudanese or Chilean or Nebraskian, from Nebraska, or Californian, or from Scotland or from Papua New Guinea or something like this. And that is their history, but not their race in a color way. And that is the goal for me. But I understand that is not the world we live in today. So that the goal is to open up a dialogue and to attack this white frailty and point it out as bad. So I also agree that white frailty is bad, while at the same time saying that seeing race is also bad. Okay? That's the complexities here, right? If we could wave our magic wand and make the world perfect, we could do it, but we can't. So you gotta work in the mud sometimes. If you're fixing a car, you're gonna get some oil splashed on you. You know. Okay, so this is the other bit, right? When she is pressed to do so, she refuses to engage further. That is the frailty part, right? So I'm not saying that the colorless view is bad, okay? I'm saying here, and agreeing with the author, right, that if the other person begins to engage in this conversation, begins to say, "Oh, I see you as white," then all of a sudden, that gives us information about how we are communicating. Right? Either I have to go in there and go, okay, I guess I'm white now, and let me talk to her as a white person, or I have to say, okay, let me talk to her and let's get over this white-black BS, as an individual. Right? But you have to get over that hump, right? You have to enter into the dialogue of white and black before you can get out of it, because they are already in it, right? You have to wander into Plato's cave in order to drag someone out. You cannot just stand at the entrance and shout. So I think that there is a admirable goal in this idea of attacking white frailty, right? In this idea of saying that people do see things in a racial manner. But again, as I repeat, the goal is to go with race entirely, right? So, it is important to recognize here that this speech that she just gave, Karen sees herself as a unique individual, Joan sees Karen as a white individual, has two sides to it. You could just as equally say, Karen sees herself as a unique individual, Joan sees herself as a black individual. Yeah, Karen sees herself as a unique individual, Joan sees herself as a black individual. Okay? And this is another potential problem. How do you get rid of race? How do you go past white frailty? Well, you also have to, if you're breaking past white frailty in order to bring it down, you also then in order to get rid of the white-black discussion, in order to create a better, more perfect world, you have to also lift up blackness, right? You have to say, you are not black, you are an individual. We're engaged in a white-black conversation, but now let us try to escape that. Let us try to connect as friends, as colleagues, as customer and seller, right? And engage along that aspect of relationship, and not be overcome by structural differences between our respective groups. And this can happen in any ism, I think. In sexism and classism, how do you talk across classes? How do you talk across sexes? How do you talk across the boundaries of a war line? When your enemies have been fighting each other for years and years and years, and you've killed their brother, you've killed their sister, you've killed their friend, they've killed your friend, right? When there is a history of conflict between countries, between peoples, right? How do you enter into that conversation and have a real dialogue? Is a complicated topic, right? It is something that I would say the answer has to do with openness and being able to deal with emotional stress in a constructive way. But this bit, when she's pressed to do so she refuses to engage further. Hey, look, if someone wants to talk about white and black, go ahead, engage them, because you are already in that conversation. Pretending that race isn't there, if they insist on talking about race, hey, let's go. Bring it on. Let's go. I guess we're doing this now. This if you've ever been in a fight with someone, right? where you're arguing, and then they start like, they throw the first punch, or they shove you first, and you're like, in your head you go, well, I guess we're doing this now. Like, I wasn't going to throw the first punch. I didn't mean to go into a fight right here, but I guess I'm in the middle of one anyway. Let's go. You put up your fists and just go at it. And you know, I'm giving this in a warlike fighting manner, but think of it as engaging with a demon or engaging with a devil, right? Hey, if the devil comes up and starts talking to you and questioning your beliefs, you don't shut your ears, you don't close your eyes, you don't sit there like a monkey. I hear no evil, I see no evil, I know no evil. No, you stand up, you look them in the eye and say, you are wrong. You know, if someone goes up and says, well, you don't like me because I'm black, you stand up and say, no, you are wrong. I don't like you because A, B, and C. You know, if someone stands up and says, you are white, and so you must act in a certain way, or you are guilty in a certain way. No, stand up and say, no, I am not guilty. No, I do not accept your worldview. You know, and this is why A, B, C. You know, and at the same time, when you engage in the dialogue, it is a dialogue back and forth. I understand why you feel that way, or I understand your idea, or I understand that I may be wrong. And so on. Okay, then this is interesting, right? Okay, so we whites who position ourselves as liberal often opt to protect what we perceive as our moral reputations rather than recognize or change our participation in systems of inequity and domination. Okay, that happens because of the mistaken implication between structural racism and individual racism, right? We don't mean individual racism, we mean structural racism. But then something happens here. Well, if you're engaging in structural racism, then what the anti-racist viewpoint, right? The extreme anti-racist viewpoint, which is unmoderated by any unracist balance, right? That one point of the pyramid is also a pusher of white guilt. It says you are part of the structure. You have benefited from the structure. Therefore, you are guilty of everything the structure has done to everybody else, because you took part in it. And it's like, no. Look, I do not accept guilt. I accept that there are problems with the structure that we should fix. And I think that there are actions we should take, and I understand I should take certain actions, and I will take those actions. But that does not mean that I will stand here and, whip my own back and express how terrible whiteness is in all its fashions, and how horrible it is that I have benefited from it, and how I am sinned and I must absolve myself from these sins. No. Look, life sucks. Life is unfair. There is no person on this entire earth that has not benefited from a structure in some way, and in the family, in a job, in their friend group, right? There is no person on this entire planet who has not suffered in some way. And so guilt, when it comes not from your own action, from your own personal actions, is often problematic. Right? Too much guilt ruins a man. Too much guilt ruins a movement. So I think there's a balance to be had here, where you say, yes, anti-racism has a point. The anti-structural movement has a point. They are correct. But the goal is to move away from that system. The goal is not to move directly opposite and choose the other extreme. We are here on earth. We are not here to choose between hell and heaven. We aren't dead. Find the balance of the triangle. Okay. But she does have a point here, okay? Thus, pointing out white advantage will often trigger patterns of confusion, defensiveness, and righteous indignation. Cue me. Righteous indignation. Through this discourse, whites characterize themselves as victim, slammed, blamed, and attacked. Right? So I just demonstrated that. through the speech I was giving, right? How that I whip myself and explain my sins and take fault for all the entire system, right? Because my assumption, my understanding of the white racist statement, of the anti-racist, anti-white viewpoint and statement that is talked about by white advantage here, right? The meaning of the dialogue in the general sense of the community and of this book in particular is to blame and attack those who are white for being white, and that is exemplified. The problem, I think, is just as I said earlier, right? In the end of part 3, what we're talking about here is the difference between, if we look at our Nietzsche, right, is the difference between a Greek philosophy and a Christian philosophy, a pagan philosophy and a Christian philosophy. Okay, and anti-racism is a very Christian philosophy, in the sense that there is good, there is bad, there are things you should do, there are things you should not do, there are rules you should question, the rules you should not question, and the concept of original sin is deeply embedded in it. And my response is no, original sin is a bad idea. Right? Attack me, yes, but allow me the dignity of defending myself. And this is what is required. Okay? The worst murderer in the world, the most evil jackass, genocider, raper, horrific person on the planet will stand there in a courtroom and has the ability to defend himself. It may be all lies, it may be hypocritical, and it may be him just fooling himself, it may be trying to trick people, it may be false, it may end up as a ranting, insulting tirade, but he is able to defend himself. He may be evil, the devil incarnate, but even the devil defends himself as he's falling down towards hell, wings burnt. It lands on the bottom in the middle of purgatory, is able to stand up and say, this is why I did what I did. I may be evil, but that's why I did what I did. And I think that to have an honest and effective discussion with whiteness as a view, you need to be able to engage in that dialogue where whiteness can say, this is why I did what I did. Right? You need to be able to engage. You need to have that space where I can say, look, I am white, but I disagree with you. Or I am white, but I am only white in this way. Or I'm white, but I do not have to be white. Or I am white, but there are reasons for why this happened. And there are reasons why this still exists. And so on and so on, right? So that is what is required, to not feel attacked, to be able to stand up here in front of a camera and speak and have people reply to me saying, oh, I understand that you said this, but you're wrong. Or you said this and I interpreted it as bad or good. Or you said this and I think that there are complications you misunderstand. Or you said this, and I understand why you feel that way, but the actual result of your actions and your speech is so on and so on. Right? And that is what allows me not to feel attacked. Right? On the other hand, if you go up and say, well, that's a white view, or obviously you are racist, right? Then well, I'm so sorry that you are incapable of understanding the black struggle, or I pity you. Let me pray for you so that you see the light. These are insults. These are just attacking individuality. And attacking structure, I think, is very possible. You can say whiteness is bad in this way. You can say that the white power structure is bad. You can say that racism is bad. but allow even the worst person to defend themselves. Give them a space for reasoned discussion, or for allowing emotions to flow, so that yes, you can be angry, you can be sad when talking about this topic. And so, okay, so she says something here. Well, no, okay, she quotes somebody, but she says, sociologist Eduardo Bonilla Silva, in his study of colorblind racism, describes an aspect of white frailty. Because the new racial climate in America forbids the open expression of racially biased feelings, views, and positions, when whites discuss issues that make them uncomfortable, they become almost incomprehensible. Probing forbidden racial issues results in verbal incoherence, digressions, long pauses, repetition, and self-corrections. Okay, so two things here. One, yes, the new racial climate forbids the open expression of racially biased feelings, views, and positions when whites discuss issues that make them uncomfortable. They become almost incomprehensible. Okay, first of all, they do not become incomprehensible. I disagree with that. They do not become incomprehensible. Where that feeling that they become incomprehensible comes from the fact that they are trying to defend themselves. Whether they defend themselves correctly or not is an entirely separate topic, but they are trying to defend themselves. They're saying there are reasons for this, or that I, as an individual, am more complex than the structure. Okay, or that the structure is pushed and pulled from two different directions at once, or there are complexities here which we need to pull out and see if they explain or demonstrate some of the issues. Okay, so if you were talking with someone, they become incomprehensible. If you don't understand what they're saying, if there is no dialogue back and forth, then what is happening is one of the two of you is unable to comprehend that the other person can have such a viewpoint. Okay? And I say one of the two of you, right? It does not, if you are talking with someone and they just seem incomprehensible, if you can't understand why they hold such beliefs or why they say what they say, then the fault is either with them or with you. Okay? Or with both of you. Because this other thing that is said, probing forbidden racial issues results in verbal incoherence, digressions, long pauses, repetition, and self-corrections. Look, that's just discussion. I, in this bit here, have engaged in digressions, long pauses, lots of repetition, and some self-corrections. Why? Because that's what happens when we talk about an issue which is complex. That is what happens when we try to understand what is going on. Now, any of those, when taken too far, is standing in the way of the discussion, right? If every time a racial issue is brought up, you digress to something else, that is refusing to engage in the topic. Every time you engage in long pauses, or you don't say anything, and you put the pressure on the other person to re-engage the wheels of the conversation, then that is standing in the way. You know? If you repeat yourself over and over and over again and never change what you're saying, never say it in a new way, right? And never actually engage in understanding why the other person isn't getting what's happening, then that fails, right? And if you engage in so many self-corrections that you become incomprehensible, right? If you say, "Oh, I meant this and this," and then you go back a week later or 10 minutes later, so, "Well, what I really meant was this. What I really meant was that. I know I said this, but let me explain what it really meant." And you go on a 10-minute long diatribe about how, well, look, when I called you a boy, this is what I actually meant. I'm like, look, yeah, spend some time self-correcting, but if all you do is self-correct, then that's not self-correcting. That is offering excuses. So again, there is a balance to be found. Understand when someone is having a complex and complicated and difficult time with the discussion. Understand when someone is engaged in changing how they think, or is engaged in honestly attempting to understand, but also understand when someone is giving a bad faith argument or a bad faith view or a bad faith effort. There's balance to be found here. But again, just because there are digressions, long pauses, repetitions, self-corrections does not mean there is a problem. And that is important. Do not demonize your enemy, or else you'll never be able to talk with them. So I think that when people have these views and they say, oh my God, I don't understand why I can't talk about this. Well, I don't understand why they keep changing the topic. Well, maybe you do, right? Maybe you can stand there and go, oh, they're changing the topic because they don't want to talk about this. They are self-correcting everything they say because they're giving excuses and they don't want to actually confront what's going on here. So there is a point to what he is saying. Like, this does happen, but again, it's a balance of how to speak, and I am tending to read in these words an outlook which they may not mean, right? A outlook which they may not be expressing to other readers. This is just what I read, how I interpret it, and I am interpreting it because of my history and because of the words reading here. I'm reading. And my understanding of their expectations due to, how much I've talked about this and how much I've read in the rest of the book. There may be an idea early in the book that they're talking about that gave me to understand how, the person writing this understands whiteness. And so when they talk about whiteness later, I'm understanding that they mean type A whiteness, not type B whiteness. And I'm saying, well, I have a different view and so on, right? I'm reading into it, but I may be wrong. Like there are other ways of understanding what's going on here. Other less extreme ways. I am in certain points definitely not giving them the benefit of the doubt. I am assuming all the way. Oh, I know what they're trying to say here. Yeah, and that's what happens, right? If I was talking with the author and we could go back and forth in 8 hours worth of discussion instead of just a book, then perhaps I would come to different conclusions about the meaning or the idea or what they are trying to express. But, I'm not perfect and I can't read minds. So we work with what we got. Okay. Now, she says something here which I think makes a lot more sense. Okay. And this is about the words you use. Okay. She says, white equilibrium is a cocoon of racial comfort, centrality, superiority, entitlement, racial apathy, and obliviousness, all rooted in an identity of being good people free of racism. Challenging this cocoon throws off our racial balance. Because being racially off balance is so rare, we have not had to build the capacity to sustain the discomfort. Thus, whites find these challenges unbearable and want them to stop. So I think when she uses the word white equilibrium here, which is much more sensible than white frailty. White frailty is a word which indicates weakness. You are frail. You are troubled. You are not strong. White equilibrium says there is a structure here. Right? It changes the discussion from individual problems or individual racism to structural racism entirely by using the words white equilibrium. Because an equilibrium is a balance of powers in a system. And I think that is a much, much, much better use of words in order to indicate what she means by white frailty. She should use white equilibrium. Right? And as a specific example of where I think that there's a problem with the book. White equilibrium makes much more sense to me. It elucidates, it clarifies the problem more academically. White frailty has too many white frailty has too many connotations in it. White equilibrium is more free of connotations and is more denotative. Okay, white frailty in action. Just some examples here. When I was a professor of education, my university was situated 10 miles from a city that is roughly 56% Black and Latinx. Our student population was 97% white, and many of them did their internships in the public schools in the city. My department hadn't hired a faculty member of color in 17 years. 17 years. I repeatedly brought this up as an issue, but silence repeatedly followed. Eventually, a white colleague came up to my office and angrily told me, "Every time you bring this up, you are saying that we shouldn't have our jobs." As a former professor and current facilitator and consultant, I am in a position to give white people feedback on how their unintentional racism is manifesting itself. In this position, I have observed countless enactments of white frailty. One of the most common is outrage. How dare you suggest that I could have done or said or done something racist? I was working with a small group of I was working with a small group of white participants when a woman I will refer to as Eva stated that because she grew up in Germany, where she said there were no black people, she had learned nothing about race and held no racism. I pushed back on this claim by asking her to reflect on the messages she had received from her childhood about people who lived in Africa. I also asked her to reflect on what she had absorbed from living in the U.S. for the last 23 years, whether she had any relationships with African Americans here, and if not, then why not? Notice that I did not tell Eva that she was racist or that her story was racist. But what I did was challenge her self-image as someone exempt from racism. Okay, the second part of that is true. The first part is false. She says, notice that I did not tell Eva that she was racist. Yes, you did. You 110% did. You said, Eva, you say you're not racist. Let me question that. Right? Now, have you reflected on living? You've lived in the U.S. for over 23 years. Are you sure you haven't been racist? Do you have any black friends? Okay. And this is one of those bits where I am reading more into the conversation than is here. Okay. I may be totally wrong about this, but what I'm reading, what I'm understanding is that the author pushed back on Eva here, right? Said, hey, no, you are racist, right? No, said, hey, surely she was aware of Africa and had some impressions of the people there. Had she ever watched American films? I asked her to reflect on the messages she had received from her childhood about people who lived in Africa, right? Now, you are, the author is saying to Eva, like what Eva is hearing is, I do not believe you. Eva, you say you are not racist. I do not believe you. And then she challenges. They'll ask about this, ask about that. Do you have any black friends? Da 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 da. And the author is doing this in a way which is trying to pull out, like she's engaging in discussion, saying, okay, I'm not. Let me see what you mean by you're not racist. Let me test. You say you're not racist, Eva. Let me test the assertion, and that is proper discussion. Okay, but in that discussion, she is also communicating that she does not believe Eva is non-racist. Okay. Okay, but what I did do was challenge her self-image as someone exempt from racism. So I agree that Eva, in this case, is demonstrating a frailty, a white frailty. It is demonstrating an uncomfortableness with white equilibrium being upset, with her white equilibrium being upset, her structural white equilibrium being upset. Okay, I do agree that she is emotionally overreacting about this topic. She is. I do agree that, we moved on and I forgot about the interaction until she approached me after the workshop ended. She was furious and said that she had been deeply offended by our exchange and did not feel seen. You made assumptions about me, she said, with an exclamation point. Exclamation point. And Eva is overreacting here. I agree that this is frailty. This is an emotional frailty, or an intellectual frailty in action, right? Where she has a white equilibrium that she's comfortable in existing, and she has a at least her self view is colorless racism, right? It is a colorless equilibrium, as it is. Colorless equilibrium might be more correct, because I would say the author sees that Eva is in a white equilibrium, and Eva sees herself in a colorless equilibrium. And these bits earlier were like, every time you bring this up, you're saying that we shouldn't have our jobs. How dare you suggest I could have said or done something racist? So in the book, the author talks about how we shouldn't view talking about racism as bad. That admitting that racism exists is not bad. I'm like, yes, I agree with you. Admitting that racism exists is not bad. Exactly. It is not bad in the sense that we are forbidden from doing it. It is not bad in the sense that to do it is bad. It is bad in the sense that oil is bad. It is bad in the sense that uranium is bad. It is bad in the sense that sunlight is bad. Look, we need sunlight as a part of our world. It is important. It is something we deal with every day. But if you step out naked into the bright noonday sun, you're going to get sunburnt, right? If you love sunbeams to an extreme degree, then you're going to end up with skin cancer. Right? In the same way, yes, racism is a part of the world, but it's like burning oil. We don't want to have to do it. We burn oil for our power, for our civilization, for our cities. But what we should do is switch to solar power. Right? Oil won't be around forever. Oil is unhealthy. Just objectively, if you could replace the entire, burning oil and coal for power system with solar power in an instant by a magic wand, then you do it. There's no question there. One of them is just better. It's the transition which is the problem. It is the movement which is difficult, right? It is the how do we change all our ships from oil? How do we, what happens to the price of gasoline for the people who still engage in cars? What happens to plastic when it's not being, when to plastic made from oil when it's not being supported by the sale of gasoline? Right? How economic is it to pull up that oil? And what about all the people who work in the factories? What about all the coal miners? It's the transition into solar which is difficult, not the idea that solar itself is bad. In the same way, I can say that talking about racism is not bad, even if I want to get rid of racism and race entirely eventually. And what she's trying, so I agree with her. I would agree with her in the moment, but not in the abstract, not in the grand scale of things. And that's a bit of I think perhaps a subtle difference. It's bad now, but it's good to drill for oil, yes, but ideally we shouldn't have to. It's good to engage in discussions about racism because it is a fact of our life today. It is a structure and a system we have to deal with. But understand also that the viewpoint which says talking about racism is bad has a valid point, has a reason for why it has that viewpoint. Nobody has a belief or a reason for no cause at all. There is something behind the action or the view. Okay. Chapter 10 here, White Frailty and the Rules of Engagement. Okay. If you insist on breaking the cardinal rule of talking about racism, then you must follow these other rules. Proper tone is crucial. Feedback must be given calmly. If any emotion is displayed, the feedback is invalid and can be dismissed. This comes from that Greek philosophy bit. This comes from the Enlightenment values. This comes from Stoic Marcus Aurelius, straight up. We are here to engage in reason. And there is a movement in the entire Western philosophical system which says emotions are bad, emotions cloud the mind. Yes, emotions cloud the mind, but emotions are always there as well. And sometimes bringing those emotions to the surface, bringing the feelings and the relations we have, speaking in a manner which is animated, where we say things we say things we may not even know we had in us. We reveal secrets we kept from ourselves even. Is important. Okay, there, she says, another rule, there must be trust between us. You must trust that I am no way racist before you can give me feedback on my racism. I think what she's trying... I know what she's getting at, but I think that effectively what she's getting at here is you have to you allow the other person to defend themselves. You say, okay, you did something racist. Why? Explain yourself. Okay? Give them a space. Because to say that someone is racist is an extreme. It's the opposite of unracism, right? It is an extreme that allows for no discussion. So you do not speak at that extreme. You say, you have done a racist thing, explain. Or why you hold the racist view, why? Right? Allow the person the space to defend themselves, even if they're an evil, murdering, racist jackass. Allow them to defend themselves so that you can engage in a conversation, so that there is space to move. Because if they can't defend, if they feel they can't defend themselves, if they feel they can't even, they could not possibly give you a reason for why they did something that you would accept, even though they think it is valid, then they stand there in chains. They stand there in prison, and nobody does well when you can't move your arms, even when you can't move your legs, when you can't move your eyes, when every time you open your tongue you are stung with nettles or branded with hot irons. Allow them to defend themselves. Okay, our relationship must be issue-free. If there are issues between us, you cannot give me feedback on racism until these unrelated issues are resolved. That's just people, right? If I don't get along with somebody and I try to give them advice or I try to critique them, they're going to take that very harshly. Yes, our relationship does not have to be issue-free, but we do have to have this trust in each other. And what can be the case is if we do not trust in each other's emotions, if we both trust in reason, if we both trust in logic, if we both trust in science, then we can refer to that movement, that ideal, as an intermediary between us. We do not engage directly. If I'm calling you racist, I don't call you racist directly. I engage in, hey, structural racism, right? I engage in history of racism because of the issues between us. And that is with any topic or discussion between any two people. What can happen here is she says, well, this happens in White Frailty. I'm like, no, that happens because we're human. And it's important to recognize that. 5, feedback must be given immediately. If you wait too long, the feedback will be discounted because it was not given sooner. I don't get that. That's just not something that I feel is relevant, really, or actually happens. Maybe it does happen, but I can't. Look, if you come to me a week and a half after our discussion and say something about a problem, then I am going to assume that you thought about that problem for a week and a half. The longer you take to give me a reply, the more important it must be for you to have bothered to give that reply. So this is what I don't know. I personally tend to disagree with. The feedback will be discounted because it was not given sooner. I'm like, no, that doesn't sound right. 6, you must give feedback privately, regardless of whether the incident occurred in front of other people. Again, this is just human nature. It's like, if you're a boss, you praise your employee in public, you berate them in private. Again, that's just human. If you cannot protect me from embarrassment, the feedback is invalid and you are the transgressor. Yeah, when people are embarrassed, they feel you're attacking them, they don't react well. Human. You must be as indirect as possible. Directness is insensitive and will invalidate the feedback and require repair. Again, that's just humanity. Talk about, be indirect when you don't understand each other. Be indirect. Try to come around it because there's a wall or a gulf between you. If someone is emotionally frail, be indirect. Come at them without, without pulling their triggers or falling headfirst onto their traps. Okay. 8, as a white person, I must feel completely safe during any discussion of race. Suggesting that I have racist assumptions or patterns will cause me to feel unsafe, so you will need to rebuild my trust by never giving me feedback again. Point of clarification, when I say safe, what I really mean is comfortable. So that's a problem with emotional frailty. That's a problem with being unable to enter into a discussion. Suggesting that I have racist assumptions or patterns will cause me to feel unsafe. Yeah, because that is entering into individual racism and saying you are racist as an individual, as you yourself and in the choices you make, you are racist, and that is bad. Okay, well, what's the opposite of that? You are racist, and that is good. I'm like, okay, no. What you want to say, you want to say like, you see race, and that is good. You understand racism, and that is good. You don't say, you are racist, or you are being racist, right? Because that is an insult. There's no way to be positive like, yeah, you know what? You are a proper racial discriminator. You know exactly how to treat those white folk. Come on. That's a matter of how you speak to people. Okay, 9. Highlighting my racial privilege invalidates a form of oppression that I experience. Classism, sexism, heterosexism, ageism, ableism, transphobia will then need to turn our attention to how you oppress me. Yeah, that definitely happens. You know, people who see the world through a certain way, like, hey, I'm a guy, or I'm a girl, you know, or I'm trans, or I am the poor working class who is abused by the bourgeoisie. You know, I'm young, and so no one thinks my words are important. I'm old, and so no one pays attention to me. You know, ableism, you know, all these things. Yeah, this is what happened, and I see what she means here in that if racism is something that we don't talk about as easily as classism or sexism, because of the culture around those isms and our discussion of them, then it is going to happen that people will default to these discussions. And I've tried to show in some way that racism, anti-racism, and unracism are on this triangle of movements, triangle of viewpoint between a system, anti-system, and unsystem. Because the same thing can be said of ableism, sexism, and so on. You know, sexism, anti-sexism, unsexism. Ageism, anti-ageism, unageism. And so on. So there will be regular patterns, I think, that if someone is used to thinking in a certain way. And I think we've all engaged with people like this who you talk with them and every single bloody discussion is about politics, and particularly about how the Republicans or the Democrats are bad and they're causing all the problems for everything. Or every single discussion is about how poor and terrible their life is and how the boss is out to get them and the system is out to get them and everybody dislikes them. And you're like, oh my God, get over yourself. You are not the center of the world. So yeah, some people, you know, so I think what she's trying to do ideally is say, look, we can talk about sexism and ageism and classism, but we don't talk about racism as readily or as obviously as easily or as often. So let us take racism, the discussion, and bring it up to the level of classism or ableism. Because the same thing can happen, right? We're just talking about class, and all of a sudden someone says, well, it's about black. And we're not talking about the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. We're not talking about the rich and the poor. We're talking about the black and the white. And all of a sudden we're like, okay, look, there are intersections between classes and races, but that does not mean that one is 100% the other, right? You are pulling apart our talk about classism by referring to race. You're pulling apart our discussion of race by referring to class, you know? The matter of talking about intersectioning isms is more complex than talking about one ism and one triangle. Yeah. Okay, 10, you must acknowledge my intentions, always good, and agree that my good intentions cancel out the impact of my behavior. Yes and no, right? Yeah, you must acknowledge my intentions, always good. Look, this is an old thought process. Old as it gets. No one believes themselves to be evil. Everyone believes they have a reason for acting like they do. Everyone feels that they can defend their actions, at least to themselves. At least most of their actions. So you have to acknowledge intentions. Don't call the Nazi evil. Call them confused. Because if you just stand up and say, you're Nazi, so you're evil, then there is no discussion to be had. They're like, what? So if I believe anything like this, I'm evil? What about me as a person? What about my history? What about my identity? And it's like, I still want to say Nazism is bad, but I have to come at it indirectly, right? I have to say that, okay, why do you believe in Nazism? What are the reasons for this? What pushed you on this path? I want to understand what happened to you to make you into a Nazi. What like, it's not because you were born evil into sin. It's not because you were born into the system. The system happened to you. The events happened to you. What happened to make you a Nazi? What happened to make you a racist? Why do you believe this? Let me know. Can you defend yourself to yourself? A lot of effective discussion with people about moral issues is showing them that they have a paradox in the way they think about a moral issue. And you don't teach people right and wrong very effectively by saying this is right and this is wrong. You teach people right and wrong by asking, what do you think is right and why? What do you think is wrong and why? Let me help you understand your own innate views on good and bad. And why Nazism is bad, Nazism is bad, racism is bad, sexism is bad, because it is illogical, because it is unreasoning, or because acting or following these movements injures yourself or injures society. Why do evil people believe what they believe? They don't think themselves as evil. They don't think of themselves as evil. But you do not have to agree that good intentions cancel out the impact of my behavior. Yes, I understand you didn't mean to hurt that person, but you did. I understand you thought you were doing good by this action, but it resulted in something terrible happening. I understand that you expected a different outcome, but that's not the outcome you got. And that's just a discussion you have to have with people, I think, especially as children growing up. Have to explain that, yeah, sometimes you have good intentions, but that doesn't mean it always works out. And so acknowledging your good intentions is important, but yes, intentions are not actions. So a lot of what she's describing here, the rules of engagement with white frailty is really, to me, just emotional frailty. Is really, to me, an intellectual frailty. And racism and racist views can be an important part of that. But these problems extend to more than discussions of race. Okay. 11, to suggest my behavior had a racist impact is to have misunderstood me. You will need to allow me to explain myself until you can acknowledge that it was your misunderstanding. Yeah, this is how you engage with people, okay? To suggest my behavior had a racist impact is to misunderstand me. My intentions are good. I think what I did was good. Right? To say that I did bad, I find troublesome. But to say I was bad, you were attacking me. You were blaming me. You're saying I did bad, but I think I'm good. So let me explain why I think I'm good. And what is the correct response on the other side? When you're listening to someone talk to you and say, I am good, and you think they did bad, what do? How do you engage with that? You draw out the paradoxes. You draw out the information. You say, okay, explain to me why it was good. And I don't understand why A and B means C. I mean, you did this, but didn't the actual result turn into this and not that? Right? Like you express, you ask questions, right? The Socratic method. You express your doubts, your misunderstandings. I don't get this. Explain it to me. Explain it to me. Explain it to me. And you let them explain themselves, and then you ask questions to them to explain themselves more. So then they have to question themselves to get back their own understanding of who they are, and then they realize that there was a problem with what they said, and then they reflect upon it. You have to induce self-reflection in order to teach somebody. And what the problem is, you will need to allow me to explain myself until you can acknowledge that was your misunderstanding. This isn't any discussion about a belief. Okay, again, just a matter of how we discuss things. She's saying here that racism is, or the pressure against discussing race is so powerful that it acts as a semi-foundational idea. I cannot be racist because racist is bad. You must have made a mistake. Okay? And we could have the same discussion about, I cannot be sexist. You must have made a mistake. I cannot be a heretic in the religion. You must have made a mistake. I cannot be unscientific. You must have made a mistake. And what they're saying there really is, I cannot be unscientific. I did not make a mistake. I cannot be sexist. I did not make a mistake. And that's a discussion you have with anybody about any movement. No, you did make a mistake. How do you convince someone they were wrong? That's really what this is about. How do you convince someone they were wrong? Okay. She says, many of us actively working to interrupt racism continually hear complaints about the gotcha culture of white anti-racism. We are sometimes depicted as looking for every incident we can find so we can spring out, point our guns, and shout, "You're a racist!" Well, certainly some white people arrogantly set themselves apart from other whites by acting in this way. In my experience, this is not the norm. It is far more common for sincere white people to agonize over when and how to give feedback to a fellow white person, given the ubiquity of white frailty. White frailty punishes the person giving feedback and presses them back into silence. So again, white equilibrium, the cultural equilibrium we have at the moment, where white race is seen as the norm and as the positive. It is a more correct and clear to me wording, white equilibrium. Okay, but I think it's an interesting bit here. Yeah, if you're giving feedback on racism or sexism or anything like that, you kind of agonize over it. Should I say something? Should I not say something? How are they going to take this? Is this going to be a problem? I've heard friends tell racist jokes, and I'm like, okay, that's troublesome, and I don't find it funny. And I'll say I didn't really find it funny. I'm like, and I'm sitting, I'm not laughing. I'm not laughing at the joke. But, I'm not also standing up and going, that was racist as hell, man. Actually, I have done that a few times. But it was usually in response to like a joke. Someone tells a very racist joke, and I'm like, that was hella racist. As a comment on the joke, without saying that, without in a negative way saying, hey, you shouldn't have told that joke. It was just like, hey, But okay, so the complaints about the gotcha culture of white racism. We are sometimes depicted as looking for every incident we can find so we can spring out, point our fingers and shout, "You're a racist." And this happens, one, because the people who do that are very loud. There is a danger in any movement that is... Okay, there's a danger in any movement that the radicals take over the speech, that the radicals are talked about. And I think what happens, especially in America, is the news cycle tends to embrace radicalism. The news cycle tends to put, we need a front page news. We need something we can splash across the TV. We need something we can put as a headline. And that's going to be a thing that is shocking. That's going to be surprising. It's going to be some terrible tragedy. That's going to be the white racists who are killing and lynching folk. That's going to be the anti-racists who are tearing out their hair and haranguing someone for a relatively innocuous statement. The news is not going to talk about the protest where nothing happens. Oh yeah, hey, we're gonna go. There's a group of like 30 people standing in front of the state capitol holding signs, and they're against the war between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Yep. And they then so-and-so, gave a speech on the front steps. And that's going to be some news. And that'll be talked about. Yep. But if the next day there is a group of 5 people who end up at the steps of the Capitol and do a demonstration where they burn the flag or burn the Constitution alive and stand up with a loudspeaker and talk about how the U.S. is racist and white people are terrible and we should all do this or that, right? Then that will be front page news for 2 or 3 days, is the feeling we have, right? That there are protests across the country against, for example, Donald Trump. Okay? And there are hundreds of protests in hundreds of cities. What's talked about on the news, what's talked about in the national news, the 3 protests where somebody got hurt. Yeah. The extremists, the loudest people, the most critical folk, speak up the loudest. And so in order to, as part of the responses I have had to this book, part of the responses I have had is me replying to the gotcha culture of white anti-racism, depicted as looking for every incident we can find so we can spring out, point our fingers and shout, "You're a racist." I am responding to this idea I have of people I know and of movements I have seen and news I have heard, which is very extreme in their anti-racist viewpoints and very loud, and wishes to drag the entire system down and sees the entire way of life that white people have as evil and despicable. The kind of white progressivism that revels in its white guilt, that enjoys being that enjoys the victimhood of having been the oppressor, right? And so I'm replying to what is probably, and I acknowledge this, a minority. I'm replying to a viewpoint I have of a national movement exemplified in individuals. I'm replying to the viewpoint I have about an entire structure of anti-racism, which only depicts is only the result of some group of people who are anti-racist. There are other groups, right? There are other ways of looking at it. There are those who hesitate whether to speak up. There are those who are quiet. There are those who simply don't laugh at racist jokes. There are those who vote for the president who speaks about racism. Hey, there are those who do their own small part. There are those who ask their friends how they feel about this event or that event. There are those who try to comprehend why their folks of color or their folks of non-color are acting in a certain way. And so how do we deal with the fact that we often, especially today, think of the extremes, right? Like there are folk who voted for Donald Trump because of economic policies. There are folk who voted for Donald Trump because they don't like the Democrats. There are folk who voted for Donald Trump because he seems like an everyman. There are also folk who voted for Donald Trump because they themselves are white Nazis, white racist Nazis, right? And you can stand in front of any political group or any political person and say, yeah, people voted for them, and I don't agree with the reasons people voted for them. Or people voted for them, and yeah, some bad people voted for them. But you have more complicated discussions for that. Look, just because they're racist Nazis, does that mean they can't vote? Like, should we strip the vote from them? Well, if we use that argument, then, well, what about the hippies? Should we strip the vote from them? If the other party's in power, they're going to use the same excuse, right? You have to have that openness in order to allow for discussion. If they can't defend themselves, then they will never acknowledge or come to realize that Nazism is bad, sort of bit. Well, I think you have to, you need to be open with your discussion, but also you need the middle groups. You need the non-radical groups to be louder, to be willing to stand up and say things. You need the news to interview regular people on the street. Don't go and search for the crazy weirdo, because he gives an interesting interview. Interview just some normal folk. Interview folk in the middle. Bring them out, and if you are, you're standing here looking at news and thinking about anti-racists and thinking they're this bad or that they're really loud or they're aggressive or they're performative, well then ask, well, what about people who only hold some of those views? What about people who are moderately anti-racist? Do I know anyone like that? Can I talk with anyone like that? Let me learn from that, I may know black people who are very upset, emotionally traumatized by their blackness. And I know other folk who are black are like, yeah, I'm black, it sucks a little bit here. And, I get some positives here and it's maybe important for me, maybe not important for me. You get people who are like, oh my God, I'm white. I think people who are like, I guess I'm white. Does that matter? Right? People are complicated. We live in a complex society. And so search out the quiet voices, search out the ones who are somewhere in the triangle of ideas and not on the edges, not standing at one of the ideals. I guess that's what I'm trying to do a little bit here by showing how complex and involved some of my thought processes are, by saying, correct me, by saying, engage with me, by saying, look, I will be better tomorrow than I am today. I will be louder tomorrow than I am today because I really, really regret my silence in the past. White frailty is also evidence in the need for so many white progressives to build trust before they can explore racism in workshops, support groups, and other educational forums. Yeah, when you're engaging in a discussion, you have to end up building trust, because the presumption is that to talk about racism is to talk about good and bad, good and evil, is to be emotionally involved, is to, like, how do you talk about racism in a very reasoned fashion? How do you talk about racism in an emotional fashion without letting yourself be overwhelmed by your emotions? It takes either practice at having discussions which are emotionally fraught, or it takes reducing the stress of a discussion by being in a safe space, by establishing trust. Okay. Right, now I want to point out some of the problems here. Okay. That she speaks about. Okay. She says, consider the following common guidelines that of building trust at their base. Don't judge. And she says, refraining from judgment is not humanly possible, so this guideline cannot be achieved or enforced and is functionally meaningless. That is bullshit. Refraining from judgment is possible, and this guideline can be achieved and is functionally meaningless. Whether it can be enforced or not is an entirely separate question. Okay? But I have this firm belief that we can achieve objectivity to a great extent. Right? I understand what she's trying to say. Refraining from judgment is not possible. Yes, but I think everyone has experienced this when talking with people, right? And they're saying something that you think is whack, or they're saying something and you know that they're just getting into it. You know, and a kid is talking about, well, you know, someone was hitting me yesterday, and you're immediately mad about it. And you're like, well, wait, let me hear the full story before we get to this. Or someone starts out with, you know, oh, Whitey did this, and you're like, okay, I know what. Until they, hey, maybe there's more. They end up talking about their boss or something, right? And when we refrain from judgment, that does not literally mean that we do not judge. It means that we refrain from judgment for a time. It means that we intentionally choose to say, I think that you are an evil Nazi murderer, but I will allow you to defend yourself. I will withhold my judgment for a few moments to try to understand your point of view and why you believe this thing. I think you may be a racist. You may be an anti-racist, right? You may be white or black or blue or gray or green. You may be on the opposite side of the political spectrum. You may be on the opposite side of a scientific belief. You may be on the opposite side of an emotional issue. But to refrain from judgment is simply to step back and say, I will not misunderstand you. I will not preemptively ignore what you have to say. I will not stand there looking at you and saying, well, you know, he's white, so he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, and not hear a single damn word you say. I will not stand there and say, well, he's 12 years old, so he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. No. Other people have minds. Other people have reasons. So when she says, refraining from judgment is not humanly possible, so this guideline cannot be achieved or enforced and is functionally meaningless, she misunderstands completely and utterly what do not judge is. What the action of do not judge means. It means that in the discussion, when you are having trouble emphasizing with someone, right? When you are preemptively having a reaction, when the back of your head is going, oh my God, that's wrong. We can, as human beings, refrain from a final judgment. We can refrain from a final ruling on the situation. We can say, stand here and I, as the judge, as the jury, will hear what you have to say. And then after you have said something, determine if you are right or wrong, good or bad, truth or lie. Okay? And this idea is so frustrating to me. To say, well, you must have a viewpoint, you must have a judgment, you must be black or white, you must be for us or against us. And no. The world is shades of gray. Okay. Again, she says, don't make assumptions. The nature of an assumption is that you don't know whether you are making it, so this guideline cannot be achieved or enforced and is functionally meaningless. Again, absolute bullshit. It is exactly the same way. Yes, I have assumptions, and then I can question those assumptions. Yes, I have assumptions, and then I can realize that those assumptions are there and de-assume and then push back against that force. Yes, I can have assumptions and involve myself in those assumptions and be called out on those assumptions. Yes, I have assumptions, but that doesn't mean that assumptions are set in stone. That doesn't mean that assumptions are all I have, okay? The common guidelines that have building trust at their base, yeah, don't make assumptions. Don't assume the person is bad. Do they sound like a racist? Don't assume they're a racist, okay? There may be a miscommunication happening here. There may be a fact that they are racist, but they don't think they are bad. There may be a complication going on. There may be they're saying racist, but they mean individual racism, and you're thinking of structural racism. Okay? We have assumptions, and we can get past these assumptions. We don't have to be trapped in assumptions, right? You can say, I've said this multiple times. I'm reading something and I am assuming what they mean. I'm saying this is what I read from you. So yeah, don't make assumptions is functionally meaningful. It is a functionally meaningful action. Okay. Building trust, assume good intentions. Yes, again, this is how you talk with people about moral issues. They don't think of themselves as evil. And calling them evil puts them in a box they can't escape from. Right? Hear what they have to say, allow them to defend themselves, and then judge. You may have an assumption about who they are or how they believe based on how they look or speak or the position they hold. He's a policeman, so he must not like this. He's a gang member, so he must be against that. He is white, so he must have these views. He is black, so he must react in this way. No. They're old. So they're from this generation, they must have this views. They are young, so they must have this view. This person is goth, so they must have this, they must like this sort of music. This person looks like some preppy valley girl, so she must like these sorts of things. This person is a jock, so he cannot be also into D&D. Like, no. Don't make those assumptions. If you find yourself that you have these assumptions, pull back. Realize that they are wrong. Push back. And if you think someone is bad, then realize also that you have reasons for thinking they're bad. Self-reflect upon your own decisions and judgments in order to improve them. Okay. Speak your truth. She says, the admonition to speak the truth seems to be an unnecessary guideline. I have not seen it. Yeah, it is unnecessary until it is necessary, right? Okay. Now, because right now, she says this, okay? More importantly, what if your truth is that you are colorblind? Because no one can actually be colorblind in a racist society. The claim that you are colorblind is not a truth, it is a false belief. This is her assumption, this is her judgment, right? This is 100% all the way the view that you cannot be colorblind in a racist society in any way. No, you must be able to, or else we could not even conceive of colorblindness. Speak your truth is necessary because it allows you to stand there and say, no, this is my truth. This is what I believe. This is actually the case, right? It is a fallback when challenged, when someone says, you cannot possibly believe that, then I can stand up and say, yes, I do. And so it is a necessary bit, because if you cannot speak your truth, then every time your truth is challenged, the challenger wins. And then the presumption, and then what the challenge, because the challenger is not speaking their truth. The challenger is saying that they speak my truth. The challenger is taking over my truth and my identity and my views and my beliefs and my actions and labeling me as something, demanding that I be something which I do not feel I am, or which I feel I have good reason for arguing against. You know, racism itself is an issue, is a problem. It is good to talk about it in a racist society so that we can dismantle the racist society, so that we can dismantle race entirely. But to attack someone and say, well, we don't need to speak our truths because I already know the truth about you. Bullshit. Okay. Respect. The problem with this guideline is that respect is rarely defined. And what feels respectful to white people can be exactly what does not create a respectful environment for people of color. So I think this is the one bit where she's right. For example, white people often define as respectful an environment with no conflict, no expression of strong emotion, no challenge of racist patterns, and a focus on intentions over impact. But such an atmosphere is exactly what creates an inauthentic white norm centered in this hostile environment for people of color. Okay. The problem with respect, in my viewpoint, is that respect is often demanded before it is deserved. Respect is often demanded before it is deserved. And this is a problem because there are folk who I respect greatly because my experience with them, who they are, what they've said, what they've written, how they live their lives. And I will give them, if they say something very suspect, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to say, okay, why do you believe that? I think you are a good person. So why are you saying something bad? Do I not understand what's happening here? Am I misinterpreting what you're saying? Do I think it's bad, but it's actually good? Like, I am giving you respect. I'm putting you on a bit of a pedestal, at least in some way. And I'm doing that because you have earned respect. Okay? But when respect is demanded without being earned, then problems arise. For me, at least, it goes back to like my dad, right? My dad would always demand we be respectful. And by respectful, what he meant was shut the hell up. I'm like, yeah, so respect must be earned, or else it isn't real. Okay, so I think what she's trying to, partially the issue what's happening here is white people often define as respectful an environment with no conflict, no expression of strong emotion, no challenging of racist patterns, and a focus on intentions over impact. Let's pull it apart. An environment with no conflict. Yeah, respect is, the demand for respect is often the purview of the powerful. To demand respect is to say, I am powerful. And the thing that can happen whether you have power or not, right? If you're some gangbuster with a gun then there are protocols in place to talk with you. Like there's a certain level of politeness you expect when you are whoever you are. You know, if you are disrespected, if someone is dissing you and looking down on you, then what is happening here? What is happening is that you are feeling insulted. You are saying, I have power, I have worth, I am an individual, right? At least treat me as in this way. At least treat me as the bare minimum that a person like me deserves. You know, at least treat me, and what can happen, of course, you know, treat me like, give me the minimum amount of respect that a person in my position deserves. Give me the minimum amount of respect that a policeman or a teacher or a politician or a social activist or a college student deserves. And this is social politeness there. And it can go too far. It can most definitively go too far, I think. That people can say, well, you need to treat me like an adult. And I'm like, kid, you're 16. I'll treat you like an adult when you start behaving like an adult, right? Like the way to reply to that demand respect is to say, no, you need to act in such a way that you deserve the respect, right? You may be a gang banger, but if you were acting like a 4-year-old child, then I'm going to treat you like a bloody 4-year-old child. Right? You may be acting as if, you know, you may think of yourself as the deacon of a church. You may think of yourself as the president. But if you're speaking like a 19-year-old emotionally frail brat, then I'm going to treat you like a 9-year-old emotionally frail brat. Okay? So the demand for respect is to say that if you want no conflict with me, you need to act in a certain way that I demand. And there is a level of politeness in society. There's a level of general goodwill towards men, which is demonstrated as an individual to an individual, which is necessary here. A certain minimum amount of respect is needed for a functioning society, but it can go too far. It can be too frail. A society can say, you cannot question me. A religion can say, you cannot question this. A political movement can say, you cannot question me. A president can say, you cannot question me. And that is an issue. Respect must be open to question. Respect must be open to conflict. Or else it is not respect at all. And it will certainly not last. Okay. Respectful, no expression of strong emotion. Yeah, so this goes to Enlightenment values again, that we are supposed to be reasonable people, that emotions are bad because they cloud judgment. And so what happens, of course, is you run into a culture where emotions are important, right? If you're I've heard this often about like Korean and Japanese. Koreans are the Irish of Asia, very emotional. The Japanese are the British of Asia, very unemotional. Right? So you have cultural differences between these. So if I'm going to one place in the planet, if I'm going to Korea and I start talking with people, I'm going to be more animated. If I go to Japan and I start talking with people, I'm going to be more calm because I'm matching the politeness level of the society. Not the politeness level, I'm matching the method of politeness within the society. And this can happen in individual places as well, right? I am matching the method of politeness at the bank. I am matching the method of politeness at the card shop. I am matching the method of politeness with my friends versus at my grandparents' dinner table. Right? I act differently in different situations. So part of the discussion that in American culture or in Western culture can be don't express strong emotions, or if you do express strong emotions, they indicate something is wrong. or something is great, right? To express a strong emotion is to derail the conversation, is to say that this conversation, instead of being about reason and logic and world and the structure, is about me. So when you're talking about individual racism, I don't like black folk, I don't like white folk, then emotions are involved. And by pulling out those emotions, you are being more honest. In structural racism, those discussions about society and the way it works, then the topic of discussion is not our own emotions. It is about the reason and the logic and the way we act. So I think that again, this has to do with discussions and philosophies. There are reasons to express strong emotions. There are reasons not to express strong emotions. There are moments where strong emotions are correct or are useful to use, and moments where they are not. I become very animated during certain discussions I have about parts of this book. And then other times I attempt to calm down and be more precise in my speech. Each of these is an aspect of who I am and how I argue and how I relate and react to thoughts and ideas. And I think I agree with her that Western philosophy in discussing topics often finds emotions uncomfortable, often does not know how to deal with emotions because they seem anti-reasonable. They seem against the point of having a discussion between us. Because if I'm just shouting, yay, up with this idea, I like this idea, and you're just shouting, no, I don't like this idea, then there's no discussion to be had. We just disagree. Different emotions pointing different directions, and it's a struggle between our personalities now, between our positions of power, who wins, whose emotion turns out to be stronger. Instead of our reason and who is correct, it becomes who feels stronger. So yeah, I think emotions cause problems, but hiding emotions also causes problems. It's a matter of discuss. Like if something happens to you and you are acted upon in a racist manner, know that there are times and ways to reply where you say, that was offensive, I find it difficult to say this, or you don't, I know you don't see this, but we actually meant, but the meaning of what you said was so and so. And then there are other times to say, I was hurt by that. How could you say that? Or I'm so offended. I didn't realize you were that kind of person, right? And that is effective sometimes, but oftentimes it is less effective, I find, and Western philosophy claims that the Western way of looking at how we should come to a conclusion reverses that and says, logic and reason is more effective, or at least being clear in our speech. Using our words to express complex ideas instead of simply standing there and screaming at each other like a pair of apes. Okay, respectful is no challenging of racist patterns. Yes, because it's power. Don't challenge the norm. So again, we get into. I agree with her. The white frailty and white outlook and white equilibrium again. Equilibrium is a better word here. Okay, and so. But such an atmosphere is exactly what creates an authentic white norm centered in this hostile environment for people of color. Yeah, if white is positive and black is bad, then a norm centered around that will be bad for people of color. So break that up. So I agree. This is, when she doesn't like these build trust movements here, and I disagree with her when she says don't judge, don't make assumptions, assume good intentions, speak your truth. She criticizes these, and I say no, these are good ideas. But with the respect bit, I tend to agree with her. Okay. So she says, the unexamined assumption underlying these guidelines is that they can be universally applied, but because they do not account for unequal power relations, they do not function the same way across race. Again, total misunderstanding of what don't judge, don't make assumptions, assume good intentions, and speak your truth means. Right? Those are methods of trying to achieve truth and openness in a discussion. Allow your enemy to defend himself so that you can enter into a dialogue space where you overlap instead of just vilifying them immediately and entirely, right? But because they do not account for unequal power. Okay, look, don't judge, don't make assumptions, assume good intentions, speak your truth is an attempt to account for unequal power relations. Those four are an attempt to account for unequal power relations. Those are an attempt to come out of the simple emotional screaming, to engage in a dialogue where we understand and communicate with each other, and give the other person and ourselves room and movement to change. Allow a defense, allow a change. Original sin is a bad idea. Respect, even though it can be and often is misused, also has a point. Do not account for unequal power relations, right? But unequal power relations does not mean 100 and 0. Okay? We have gotten better. We are not today in the same social position we were during slavery. We are not in the same boat where we say, I'm white, you're black, you can't say a single damn word. You looked at me wrong, I'm going to whip you. We are not in this situation today. Even as there are unequal power relations between white and black races, you can stand there as a black person and say, I demand to be respected for who I am. I demand to be respected as the person whose ancestors dealt with these troubles and went through all these difficulties and marched in the civil rights movement. I demand to be respected as the worker I am today, as the person with a mind and an ability. I demand to be respected as an American who can say what he wants. Black or not, I have these to fall back on, you know? White or not, I have these to fall back on. I am still a person. I am black, and I in some way am able to partake of the feelings of injustice which my race has. I am able to stand here and say that you are being racist, that something is wrong here. Right? As a white person, I am able to stand there and say that I have a history and I am not defined by whiteness in every way. I am an individual as well. I am a person with a mind. I am a boss. I am a child. I am an adult. I am a freelancer, right? Demanding respect, even for the most lowly level, is a way of dealing with unequal power relations. It says that power may be unequal between us, but you, dear overlord, dear master, dear white person, dear president, dear policeman, can only go so far. It says that there are limits to any power relation. We are not in the days of slavery any longer. And just as there are no more slaves, there are no more masters. Okay, so she says, An antidote to white frailty is to build up our stamina to bear witness to the pain of racism that we cause, not to impose conditions that require people of color to continually validate our denial. Yes, I think that is entirely correct. I think she has hit the dot right there. Build up our stamina to bear witness to the pain of racism that we cause. That is, someone calls me, well, what if someone does literally point a finger and boldly say, you are racist? Well, then I need to have the emotional capability, the intellectual breadth to understand why they are saying that, to look at myself and go, am I being racist? Am I doing bad? Can I be better? Should I correct myself? Are they overreacting? Am I underreacting? What is going on here, right? Do I have the capability to honestly and earnestly face an accusation and determine the truth? I am the judge and the jury of my own spirit and soul. Not them. What that means, that as the judge, as the jury, I have a responsibility to myself, to my own immortal ideal, to stand up straight and allow the challenges, to stand up straight and admit that I am not perfect, that I am not God, that I'm a human being, and that I am someone who can improve in certain ways, which means that sometimes I fail, sometimes I am wrong. Okay? I am not born and stuck with original sin, but sometimes I do sin, right? And there's this understanding to be sought here. There's this understanding that other people have a point of view, and perhaps they have a point. But also, I have to demand this for myself, that anyone looking at me and seeing me also recognize that I might have a point. And don't listen to what I have to say and then dismiss it. Listen to what I have to say and then try to understand why I say that, right? I earlier called, her criticisms of the building trust base, don't judge, don't make assumptions as BS, right? It's bullshit. And I think I articulated my reasons why. I think she is misunderstanding. Right? I am saying that I understand, but I have critiques. And if you're going to reply to my critiques, treat my critiques as I have yours. If you think I'm total BS, call me out on it and say why. Okay, that second part is vitally important. Just as important as the "you are racist" finger is the follow-up. You are racist because. She says, I have been in many white racial justice groups wherein the participants expended much energy making sure people were kind and compassionate to each other and didn't break trust. So much energy, in fact, that we could no longer help each other see our problematic patterns without breaking the norms of the group. Yes. So if we go back to her criticisms of don't judge, okay? There is a way to misuse don't judge as a guideline. There's a way to say we should never judge. And that is not what don't judge means, right? She is saying that she has seen this in events, that she has seen people use the don't judge or show respect or assume good intentions and take those ideas too far. So far, in fact, that a discussion of racism cannot happen because we're all so focused on making sure we all feel good about each other. We all trust each other, and we all trust each other so much that we can't say anything real. So when I say don't judge and don't make assumptions and don't assume good intentions and speak your truth and be respectful in some ways, I mean that these powers come with responsibilities. These laws come with a cost. You have to pay. There is a tax for the road of trust. And there is a rule to follow in the road of trust. And that rule is go someplace. Do something with it. Don't judge, but go towards a judgment. Do not begin from a judgment, end in a judgment. Do not begin in an assumption, end by learning about your assumptions. Do not be... Okay? Begin looking at people's good intentions. And then end understanding people's actions. Begin with speaking your truth and end with being sure of your truth, with being able to defend your truth, with clearly understanding your truth to its depths. Begin with a level of respect to others over their ideas and their beliefs. End with understanding who and what deserves respect and how much. Just because someone demands respect does not mean they deserve it. Just because someone demands that you not judge them does not mean that they should not be judged. Just someone demands you don't make assumptions about them does not mean that your assumptions are not right. Just because someone demands and says, this is my truth, does not mean their truth cannot be questioned. And this is the other side of it. It goes too far to say that don't judge is functionally meaningless. It goes too far to say don't make assumptions is functionally meaningless. It goes too far to say speak your truth is an unnecessary guideline. Okay? And we would be going too far if we went the other way. We would be going too far if we said that don't judge is the rule and the law and you should never judge. We're going too far if we said that your truth is all that matters and not the actual real truth. Those are going too far. Those are problems. That is a white frailty. That is an emotional frailty. That is a comfortable, soft equilibrium which ignores the thorns and rocks that make up the world. Okay. What time is it? Oh my God. Oh, Dios. Ay, this. It's 3 a.m. I really need to get to sleep. But I have 2 chapters left, so I'm going to go through these a little faster now. So chapter 11, White Woman's Tears. The term white tears refers to all the ways, both literally and metaphorically, the white frailty manifests itself through white people's laments about how hard racism is on us. Okay, yes, that definitely happens. 100%, all the way. People are like, hey, I'm white, and it's so hard that I've been accused of being racist, and it's so hard to hear about how terrible whiteness is, and it's so... I feel so sad when I hear about those poor black folk and whatnot. And then they make it all about them. And they cry tears, which are half crocodile tears, so that they can change the entire narrative and turn it on themselves. Black Lives Matter? Well, actually, Blue Lives Matter, and that's what's important. I mean, yeah, Black Lives Matter, sure, a little bit. But Blue Lives Matter, that's what I feel really strongly about. And this absolutely happens. He says, many of us see emotions as naturally occurring, but emotions, she says, are political in 2 key ways. Our emotions are shaped by our biases and beliefs, our cultural frameworks. Our emotions are also political because they are often externalized. Our emotions drive behaviors that impact other people. I have been, during this discussion, during my events, my reasonings, very emotional at certain points. I have expressed my annoyance or my complex relations or my happiness sometimes over a small joke. I have expressed anger and sadness. I have agreed. I have disagreed. I have been loud. I have been quiet. I've tried to move from the force of the waves crashing against the rocks to the gentle lapping of waves in the sand and the sea with the sunrise and the wind. Okay? So I think it's often the case that we automatically assume emotions are entirely honest, and they are not. They are, how we feel emotionally is an aspect of our reality, is an aspect of our world, is an aspect of our identity. And so, playing the outraged victim of reverse racism is often a way of shutting down speech over racism. Is often a way of redirecting the discussion to be about you and how bad you feel by taking it over. Okay, and she points out here, we need to interrupt structural racism. We need to recognize and challenge the norms, structures, and institutions that keep it in place. Consequently, if we whites want to interrupt this system, we have to get racially uncomfortable and be willing to examine the effects of our racial engagement. So this is pushy, right? When we make claims about reverse racism, when we say, "Oh my gosh, you're playing the race card here," or "Then he played the race card and I couldn't say anything," or she points out channel switching. Well, I mean, yeah, racism exists, but it's really about class. The problem isn't black and white; it's that black people are poor, and how do we make people not be poor? Let's focus on the poor folk. And all of a sudden, racism is kind of left behind. And we're talking about poor. And it turns out black and white folk are poor. And you explain away disparities by saying, well, yeah, black kids don't pass high school at a high level. But actually, if you look at the class disparity, poor folk don't pass high school at a high level. Well, it just so happens that a bunch of black kids live in the poor part of town. So there's a very strong overlap here. Just so happens that a bunch of white kids live in, up the hill in the good part of town, and they're passing high school with flying colors. That there's some overlap here. Let's not remain, we can admit that there are intersections, and not between class and race and sex and so on, and geography, for example. But an intersection does not mean that one aspect of an ism, one aspect of the problem, explains all the other issues. We live in a complex world. In the same way, when we are very emotional about an issue, that does not mean that emotion is all we should engage with. When we are very calm and reserved and intellectual about a idea, that does not mean that emotions are not involved. And so next time you see, some white person crying foul over an aspect of racism, ask the question, do they benefit from that? Is the discussion now about them? Have they quieted racism? Are they are upset. But does the fact that they are upset mean that I am wrong? Does the fact that they are upset mean that the person who accused them or who spoke to them is wrong? No. That they are upset just means that they are upset, and it may just as well be their own frailty as the topic of conversation. Okay, then there's another bit I want to talk here. She says, ameliorating a white woman's distress as quickly as possible may be felt as a literal matter of survival. Yet, coming to the rescue of a white woman also drives a wedge between men and women of color. Rather than receive social capital that reinforces his status, a man of color put in this position must now live with the agony of having to support a white woman over a person of color in order to survive. Okay, I understand the idea. I understand this as an overflow from the days of discrimination and slavery. But where I have most commonly seen this used is in black on black racism. Is on a black girl accusing a black guy of being a bad black person because they support a white woman in some way, or because they broke up with them, because the black guy broke up with the black girl in order to date a white girl, and the black girl accuses the black guy of being trying to be white, and this is seen as a negative. So the idea that you can't support the other person, a person of a different color, against someone of your own color is problematic to me because of how I have seen it happen. If you are ganging up on people on white folk, or you're ganging up on black folk as a group, it's like a bunch of white kids ganging up on a black kid, shouting him down, saying his ideas are stupid, disagreeing with him, insulting him, or a bunch of black kids doing the same to a white kid, or a bunch of white kids doing the same to a white kid and saying, "Oh, you like blacks. You're trying to be black. You wish you were black." And the same thing. You wish you were white. You're acting awfully white here. I think that in instances of racist actions, in instances she's talking about here, where, for example, white girl in instances right here, where black girl points out to white girl that white girl is being racist. White girl bursts into tears. Black man defends white girl and says to black girl, "You shouldn't have said that. You should have been kinder." I think in that specific situation, she has a point that this can be a problem, that the black guy in that specific situation is taking refuge in a social norm, is saying that this white woman being in emotional distress indicates to me that we should stop talking about this racist issue, or indicates to me that the black girl went too far. That makes sense. But I think it is a very dangerous idea, because I have certainly seen this happen, at least in sexism bits, where all of a sudden you have a guy and a girl arguing. The guy says something, the girl bursts into tears, and all the girls around end up on her side. Not because they think she's right, but simply because she's in emotional distress, and they now feel that they need to support her as a female, support her as a woman. And the same thing can happen to guys, right? And now the guys feel that that they have to support. We have to support our guy friends in relationship issue. Oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Oh, she's going too far. She is being unkind to you. She is asking too much, right? That is something that I myself have seen happen, where we solidify around sex, because that is something that I have experienced more often, as a manner of forming groups where we defend one another over moral issues simply based on the emotions one feels, and not about the rightness or wrongness. So I find the idea that simply by saying that a person of my race is wrong or did something wrong, I am being a traitor to the race, is a bad idea. I think that is a dangerous idea. And I have seen things like that happen in relationships between men and women, right? That you are being a bad guy by taking the girl's side. And instead of getting at the truth, instead of coming to an honest understanding of our relations and our purposes for being here and talking with each other, we fail. We sit behind a judgment or an assumption or a sort of respect, and we say, we must respect the president because he is the president, and the president can do no wrong. And no, that's not how respect works. You know, that's not how presidency works. You know, we must support the anti-racist because the anti-racist can do nothing wrong. No, they can. They can go too far. They can be closed-minded. They can do harm. We must support the police because they are here to defend us. Well, to an extent, you support the police, but you also need to be willing to stand up and question them. To say, when are you doing something wrong? To say that there are limits to how far we can be on the side of a group. Because if we are too much of a group, we do away with individuality. We do away with the search for truth. We do away with the point of philosophy, and we simply become cogs in a machine driven by tears. Driven by blame. And that is an undesirable kind of life. Okay. So chapter 12, where do we go from here? The equity team, she says, the equity team has been invited to a meeting with the company's new web developer. The team consists of 2 women, both of whom are black, and me. I add that the training was not always well received. In fact, one member of our team was told not to come back. I make a joke. The white people were scared by Deborah's hair. Deborah's hair has long locked braids. The meeting ends and we move on. A few days later, one of my team members lets me know that the web developer, whom I will call Angela, was offended by my hair comment. Angela nods and explains that she did not know me and did not want to be joking about black women's hair, a sensitive issue for many black women, with a white woman whom she did not have a trusting relationship with, much less in a professional work meeting. I apologize and asked her if I've missed anything else problematic in the meeting. Yes, she replies, I wrote that survey, and I spent my entire life justifying my intelligence to white people. And she had early been over a survey, and there had been a survey in the meeting, and she hadn't treated it. She had pushed it aside. She hadn't even finished it. And this woman is like, and Angela here is like, I wrote the survey, and I spent my entire life justifying my intelligence to white people. So there's two bits. There's complex bits going here, but two I want to focus on is explains she did not know me and did not want to be joking about black woman's hair with a white woman who she did not have a trusting relationship with. Okay, so earlier, the author was saying that building trust isn't important. Or at least that building trust is not something we should aim for. That these guidelines that have building trust, that are for building trust, are functionally meaningless. And then later, there's a black woman in her story saying that, I don't trust you yet, so don't make that joke. Right? So what this illustrates to me is that trust is necessary. That there is a good reason for building trust exercises, because you can't even talk about hair. You can't even make a joke about hair without someone being offended, because there is no trust. And why is she offended? Because she's sensitive about it, because she's black and she's a sensitive topic. She's offended because the person who made the joke is white. And a sort of question comes into vogue. To what extent are we responsible for other people's emotional issues? To what extent do I need to pay attention to people who are black and how they see blackness and whiteness and what they feel sensitive about, what I can and cannot say, what jokes I can and cannot make, or should not be allowed to make, or what jokes what can I say, and to what level do I make allowance for their being upset? To what level do I quiet my own ideas and enforce in order to make sure that I'm racially sensitive? And this is a question at the heart of how we deal with race and racism in our daily lives. How much attention do we pay to it? I deny that racism and race is the end-all, be-all, everything in all interactions, but it is certainly in some interactions. And there may be times where I don't even understand why someone overreacts. Right? She says, yes, she replies, that survey, I wrote that survey, and I have spent my life justifying my intelligence to white people. And I'm like, what am I supposed to say? Look, lady, that's great, but it still wasn't a good survey. I understand that you're insulted by this and you take it badly, but it still wasn't a good survey. And I shouldn't stand here and pretend that because you're black, that the survey you wrote is better. I shouldn't give you 50 extra points to my opinion of your creations because you're black. No. Excellence has its own point. It's like the affirmative action bit. I am to recognize that being black means you had a harder struggle. I am to recognize that being a woman means you had a harder time becoming a handyman, handy woman. Right? I am to recognize that being Asian means you have faced discrimination in this way. Okay? But in regards to your creations, I am not to judge the quality of your creations by your race. I'm not to judge, I'm not to give you extra points on a grade because of your race. I am to understand where you are coming from. And perhaps if there are problems, if there are struggles, give you extra resources. Say, oh, the black kids who come into my class don't always have the best home environment. So let's give them a place on campus where they can exist in a safe space. The white kids in my class do not always have an awareness of racial issues. So let us bring up racial issues in a lesson of class so that we can teach them and make them be better. I often have issues in emotional connection. So I should open myself to emotional connection and take emotional risks in order to improve myself, right? And to recognize that just because I have an autism or an ism or a history does not mean that I am to be given the benefit of something simply because of who I am or what I am. It means that I may need more assistance or help. It means that I may have blind spots that I just don't see. But to what extent I want, golden rule here, like treat others as you would wish to be treated yourself. And for me at least, if I write a bad survey, I don't care if you're black or white. If I have a bad idea, if I am expressing a racist viewpoint I don't even know is racist, then I hope for a reply. I hope for a comment so that I can evaluate it. It does not mean I will immediately agree with the other person and say, oh my gosh, you're right. I'm so sorry. I'm terrible. I'm dumb. No. It means that I will stand there and go, let me think about this for a couple of seconds. Let me ponder this in some of my speech. Let me wonder about this for 6 months, and then I'll write a poem about it. Because this can happen sometimes where someone says, oh, I am so-and-so, I'm white, or I'm black, or I'm poor, or I'm missing an arm, and therefore I need accommodations. And accommodations, yes, to an extent, right? If you need extra time to finish a test, all right, we will give you extra time to finish a test. That does not mean we will give you 4 days to finish a test that everybody else does in half an hour. Okay? It means you'll get an extra hour and a half. If you are blind and you need a test that is given orally, then we'll give you an oral test. We don't give you the answers along with that oral test, right? Accommodations to a point. Affirmative action, yes. To a point, yes, we have affirmative action. We do what we can to have more people of color or people of race or people with disabilities to attend the college. But we don't pick out every single black kid in the entire tri-state area and say, you know what, you automatically get in because of your skin color. It's like, no, you still have to prove yourself. You still have to make the grades. The point of, I heard it stated once. The point of affirmative action is not to make there be more people of color in a higher position. The point of affirmative action is to give an equal chance to people of equal ability. Right? Because it happens to be that if you are hiring, you tend to pick the white applicant over the black applicant, right? They have done studies with this, right? For example, with black and white names, with female and male names. You submit the exact same resume. You submit the exact same information for a college application, right? Or to a job, or to an editor. And you include information which identifies you as male or female, as white or black. as Asian or Caucasian, then you are treated differently. Then you are more or less likely to be hired. Okay? So affirmative action looks at this reality and says, okay, you are actually treated differently by the deciders in the system because of your skin color, because of your race. And affirmative action is acting in such a way that this discriminatory activity is reversed, is undone. It is to give an equal chance to those of equal ability when the system does not. When the system says, in order to be a female astronaut, you must, in fact, be better than all the male astronauts. And this is something that I generally feel is often the case, right? If I am looking at a situation, or looking at a hiring choice, looking at picking between two books on a topic, then I'm going to say it is because I know the world I live in. The black person or the female or the blind person probably is better, because in order to achieve an equal level, if I'm going to hire two PhDs, one's a male, one's a female, and they're exactly the same in every way except for male and female. In fact, one's male, one's female, then I'm probably going to go, the female probably had a harder time of it. The female probably struggled more. The female probably, wanted this PhD more because of my assumptions about it being more difficult for women to achieve a certain level in a profession than men. Therefore, if they're equal, the woman must actually be better than the man in order to achieve the same level. And we hear there's a movie or a TV show about like it has to do with a black and white surgeon who did like the first heart surgery in a baby, something like that. And the black surgeon has to come in through the back door, and it turns out that his work, his ideas are taken advantage of by the white person, by the white surgeon, who takes credit for the black guy's abilities. And so you look at it and you go, okay, the black surgeon, the white surgeon pioneered heart surgery. But really what was going on is the black surgeon was, even though he's being treated as equal in our heads, two surgeons, one's white, one's black, actually had to be so much better than the average level of surgeon that he stands out. And this is something that happens. We have these racial viewpoints, these sexual viewpoints, these systemic viewpoints about the way the world is, and there are complexities often hidden in that, and how we act and how we think. Now, she says here, I would have felt unfairly accused and seen myself as a victim of Angela's unfairness. Well, it is unfair. You are unfairly accused, most definitively, but that is happening because we live in an unfair world. And the point of this whole book, right, White Frailty, is to point out that we live in an unfair world, and that in order to make it fair, we need to deal with that unfairity. We need to talk and face up to the ways in which the world is unfair, so that we can fix them, so that we can improve the system. so that we can make a better world. And even though she doesn't really focus on the better world bit, I think it's there eventually. Okay, so she talks here. She says, I bring my group's history with me. History matters. And this is also a question like, okay, to what extent do I need to be aware that of how I look and what other people interpret that as, right? If I look like white or black or Mexican, to what extent do I need to be aware that other people see me as white or black or Mexican? I hope none. I hope that the ideas I've been talking about here and the way in which I've tried to explain some of my feelings through differing viewpoints and tried to say, white and black and white and let me bring in sexism here and classism here and point out a triangle and come up with different names and try to understand or try to explain myself better and try to show that my ideas, I hope, transcend my viewpoint. That my ideas, I hope, achieve some level of objectivity. That my ideas and my speech is understandable by other folk. That I am not simply shouting into a void of nothingness, but I am shouting into a crowd of human beings with understanding and reason and spirit and emotion. And yes, their own history, but tomorrow, the future is not our history. Tomorrow, the future is a mystery. So here, in chapter 4, she says, I warned readers not to depend on people of color for our racial education and explain why this dependency is problematic. Readers may have been left wondering how we would get this information if we don't ask people of color to give it to us. We can get it in several interconnected ways. We can seek out the information from books, websites, films. Many people of color are committed to teaching whites about racism on their own terms and have been offering this information to us for decades, if not centuries. And it's their own lack of interest or motivation that has prevented us from receiving it. This is true for almost anything. You do not know, you can learn. There is a YouTube video out there where someone talks about this. There is a book someone has written about this. There is an academic paper. There is an idea. There is a poem someone has made where they explain their emotions about this event or that event. And she says here, okay, and oftentimes we as human beings exist in an equilibrium. That is a white equilibrium, a class equilibrium, a general equilibrium, and an equilibrium where it's unracism is the equilibrium we expect, right? And we go back to the very beginning of my speaking here. In order to exist, we have to move. In order to walk, we have to fall out of balance. We live in an equilibrium, and the equilibrium is comfortable. But if we stay in that equilibrium too long and never escape it, never shake the ground on which we stand, then we will die on the ground on which we stand, never having seen the world, never having understood the complexities and the wonderment and the terror of all which is around us. We will die blind, deaf, dumb, not even knowing what we have missed. And that is a terrible event. He says, when I began this work, I dreaded getting feedback from people of color on my racist patterns and assumptions. Now I welcome this feedback. To have a willingness in you, to have the emotional strength, to have the capability to say, these are my ideas, These are my feelings. These are my assumptions and judgments and truths. And I invite challenges because I am attempting here to build trust, not necessarily with the watchers and the readers, but with myself, to know that I can speak up, to know that I do not have to be silent, to know that I can be me, that I have the bravery to be myself in a public fashion before the world, and I'm not stuck always in my own shell and my own blindness and my own self-hatred. Instead, I have the capability of standing up and saying to God and people and the future and the past, here I am, this is what I am, and I am strong enough to withstand the slings and arrows of misfortune. Say to myself, I am strong enough to withstand the slings and arrows of speech, of interlocution, of looking someone in the eye and being not only honest, but also open. And so this isn't about racism for me, right? This isn't about a system. This isn't about a struggle. This is, to a broad extent, about pulling out some aspect, some part of myself, and realizing that I live not only in a world that is colored in certain ways, but in a world that is shattered into pieces, into a world of shards and facets of a jewel. Shine a light on a crystal and the entire thing glows. It's not just one angle or one way of seeing the world. There's no one true, absolute way. There is a method and a road and a wood full of lost kids just trying to find their way out. So she says here, we can interrupt our white frailty and build our capacities to sustain cross-racial honesty by being willing to tolerate the discomfort associated with an honest appraisal and discussion of our internalized superiority and racial privilege. The last part of that is unnecessary, right? We can interrupt our frailty and build our capacity to sustain honesty by being willing to tolerate the discomfort associated with appraisal and discussion. Racist issues are but one part of the world we live in, are but one of the many issues we deal with, is what I mean to say. And what we can gain from being able to talk about race, we can then apply to other parts of our life. What we gain from other parts of our lives, we can then apply to our discussions of racism. We grow in many ways at once and are interconnected with many limbs. Okay. And finally, as a comment on this, she says, I am sometimes asked whether my work reinforces and takes advantage of white guilt, but I don't see my efforts to uncover how race shapes my life as a matter of guilt. I know that because I was socialized as white in a racism-based society, I have a racist worldview, deep racial bias, racist patterns and investments in a racial system that elevated me. Still, I don't feel guilty about racism. I didn't choose this socialization. It could not be avoided, but I am responsible for my role in it. To the degree that I have done my best in each moment to interrupt my participation, I can rest with a clearer conscience. Okay, this work is entirely about white guilt. She says, I don't see how she says, I don't feel guilty about racism, but immediately afterwards, she says, to the degree I am responsible for my role in it, to the degree that I have done my best in each moment to interrupt my participation, I can rest with a clearer conscience. To clear your conscience is to absolve yourself of guilt. Okay? This is 100%. I am white, and I am part of a system, and I see racism, and I am trying to dismantle it, and when I do so, I feel better. That is just the same, okay, as guilt. She says here, unlike heavy feelings such as guilt, the continuous work of identifying my internalized superiority and how it may be manifesting itself is incredibly liberating. When I start from the premise that of course I have been thoroughly socialized into the racist culture in which I was born, I no longer need to expend energy denying that fact. I am eager, even excited, to identify my inevitable collusion so that I can figure out how to stop colluding. This is the definition of original sin. This is guilt. Christian, philosophical, moral style guilt in its most honest and complete sense. I am eager, even excited, to identify my inevitable collusion? The continuous work of identifying my internalized superiority is incredibly liberating. This is 100%, this is inherent sin. This is original sin. I have sinned, I have eaten the tree of good and evil, I have done bad. And I will spend the rest of my life apologizing to God for what I have done. I will spend the rest of my life apologizing to the blacks, apologizing to the people in my life for me being white and me inevitably colluding in whiteness and how terrible it is. And when I admit that, when I admit my sin and my guilt, when I absolve myself and say I have done something to make the world a better place, I have moved against my own society, the own structure, the own social structure I was born up in, I feel relieved. That relief is absolution from guilt. That relief is saying, I am not guilty anymore. I have done better. And I am not saying this is bad. Okay? You may have a good reason for this. The author may have a good reason for this. The author may be right, for all I know. The author may be truly hitting it on the nose when she says people are white and born white and they have to see white. But do not stand here and say that this movement is not about white guilt. Do not stand here and tell me that this entire book has nothing to do with guilt. It is entirely to do with guilt. The problem, I think, that white people have with the anti-racist movement is anti-racist says you are white and you are guilty. Says you are white and you have sinned by virtue of the fact of what you are. And this is simply repeating the horrific racial attitudes of the past in an opposite direction. This is simply repeating the you are black and therefore you were born substandard, right? You are black and therefore you were born. Yeah. Let me just finish. Go away. Yeah. That you were black and you were born monkey-like. or you're more monkey-like because of the shape of your head, and you can't ever escape that. We couldn't teach blacks to read or write. Blacks don't understand philosophy. These are views people said. These are views people had. And you could replace that with blacks are born disadvantaged. Blacks are born to suffer. Blacks are born and in such a way that they need help getting a job. They need help attending the best universities. And this itself is problematic, right? I have read essays by people who are like, I don't want to be black and told that I have something wrong with me because I'm black. No, I want to be black and proud of myself. In the same way, you want to be white and proud of yourself. Recognize that there are problems. Recognize that if you're black, there are social issues and differences that affect you. But you are not doomed because of that. If you are white, recognize that there are advantages and privileges you have, but you are not doomed because of that. You can change. You can be someone different. In order to actually achieve the goal of anti-racism, you need to let go of guilt. Not simply deny it, not simply call it by another name, not simply feel relief when you admit your inevitable collusion. No, you have to get rid of guilt. You have to say that we live in a racist system and a racist society, and I am not at fault for that. And I do not need to apologize for that. And I need to do better than my ancestors. And I need to do better than me of yesterday. Okay? Without feeling guilt, without feeling that I have sinned, without feeling that there is something wrong with me, take race, black, white, Asian, Native, whatever the case may be, and recognize that it is but a chain. It is a heavy weight that drags us down, is my viewpoint here. Right? But by assaulting people and laying guilt upon them and denying that guilt is a thing, you are being hypocritical. And the very hypocrisy is a death knell for any hope of actually achieving an anti-racist goal, where we achieve the view of Martin Luther King. Because if we are anti-racist and we do not achieve the viewpoint of Martin Luther King, if we do not fight for the I have a dream where my children will be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, then we will simply repeat the mistakes of the past, and black will be on top and white will be on bottom. Because we will have eventually entered a world that is exactly what we have now, but the mirror of it. Where whites cannot say certain things because they are white, or whites are blamed for certain events in the world because they are white. And no, we are not such a people that we are guilty for what we've been born into. We are only guilty of what we have done. And to identify my collusion is one thing. Yes, I should identify my collusion. I should recognize when I am being racist and when I am being prejudiced and when I am being discriminatory, when I am being wrong. But I do not recognize my inevitable collusion. I refuse to agree with any viewpoint which holds that racist collusion is inevitable, that we must be white or black. We must be good or bad. We are human beings, first and foremost. I am an individual, first and foremost, in a society, a member of a people and a country, but not the less for that. I am not less because of that. I am not less of myself, and I am not less of my capabilities. The world is not less possible because of what it is today. The world may change in unexpected and unimagined ways, I hope. He says, having said that, I can offer a few strategies for trying to work with one another on our white frailty. First, I try to affirm a person's perspective before I share mine, and when I do share mine, I try to point the finger inward, not outward. For example, I might say, I can understand why you feel that way. I have felt that way myself. However, because of my opportunity to work with people of color and hear their perspectives, I have come to understand. And yes, that is a way to act. To say, I understand you, but this is why I feel the way I feel. And I have information which you do not have access to because I have worked with people of color. That is fine. That works. But I, in return, can say, I understand what you have to say. And this is what I read from your words. And this is my response. And this is my inward expression. This is me trying to spend hours explaining why I believe what I believe and how I come to certain conclusions and what I hope the better world is. As she says at the end here, I have been engaged in this work in a range of forms for many years, and I continue to receive feedback on my stubborn patterns and unexamined assumptions. It is a messy, lifelong process, but one that is necessary to align my professed values with my real actions. It is also deeply compelling and transformative. My final question is, transformative to what? Because I understand the wish to talk about race. I understand the wish to go through white frailty. But once you have achieved this, once you have done this, once you have transformed who we are as a person, as a people, what do we transform into? What is the point?